Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law. We're going to be doing something a little bit different today, I suppose. We're going to be doing a reaction video, and we're going to be doing it in mostly real time with you guys. I watched about a half hour of this already. It's an hour and 20 minutes long, hour 29 minutes long, so it's an hour and a half long, which means that we'll be here for, I don't even know, 3 hours, 3.5 hours. By the time we're done, we'll be doing Q&A with the members. That's probably where we're going to be. We'll probably go straight from this live stream into the Q&A live stream because that's at 7 o'clock. So we got 4 hours to power through this thing, and then we got Q&A time. All right, so what are we doing exactly? Well, as I'm sure some of you know, JK Rowling of Harry Potter fame has made some tweets that Natalie Wynn of ContraPoints describes as homophobic, or apologize, transphobic. And I like listening to ContraPoints because I like keeping my own thoughts in check. I like listening to right-wing content. I like listening to left-wing content because I can keep my own thoughts in check. And I'm much more on JK Rowling's side of this argument and much less on Natalie Wynn's side of this argument. A lot of JK Rowling's things she's writing sounds like things that I could be writing. And Natalie Wynn argues that that perspective is bigotry, among other things. Okay, so what we're going to try to do, or at least what I'm going to try to do, is I'm going to listen to someone who disagrees with me and try to comment along it on the way and try to say how I'm thinking about these issues or how I'm perceiving these issues. Because, again, I like to make sure that I'm not making a mistake. I like to make sure, to the degree I'm possible, I like to check my own biases, I like to check my own thought process, and I listen to left-wing content in part to check myself and make sure that I'm trying to listen to the other side as much as I can. And I don't always understand it. I don't always agree with it, but at least I'm trying the best I can. That isn't to say that I'm doing the best job possible. It isn't to say that, I'm truly neutral or truly giving it a fair shake, but at least I'm making some attempt on it. So I thought what we'd do is we'd view this together in quasi-real time with pauses along the way, and I'd respond to what Natalie Wynn is arguing and try to check my own perspective. So I'm going to try to, as best as I'm able, steel man what ContraPoints is saying and try to give my own response, for better or worse, to what she's saying. So there might be points I agree. I suspect there will be a lot more points that I disagree, but I'm trying to think through this in real time. So we can at least try to get through this together. So that's what we're doing now. So buckle yourselves in, guys, because we're going to be here for a while. All right, we're just going to start this thing from the beginning and analyze it. Now, of course, as always, I will be analyzing this at least partially from a legal perspective, not fully, because there will be some philosophy and stuff beyond that too. But there'll at least be some legal analysis in here along the way. So this will be different. It'll be an experience. So get comfortable is all I have to say about that, man. Here we go.
Bubble, bubble, toil and trouble. Fire burning cauldron bubble. Something wicked this way comes. Magical deeds are afoot, dear readers. Magical darkness. I must. Joanne, I want to talk to you, Joanne. What is it about Joanne's? I can't catch a break from these people. So, now that 2020 is finally over, I think we can let the record conclusively show that it was a year whomst is bad. And on top of everything else that was going on, truly the last thing we needed was the author of Harry Potter coming forward to announce there's 2 things she can't stand: bigotry and the transgenders. Ow. Elderberry wand, turgid, with a core of ice dragon. Lumos. Can we afford spells? Is that in the budget? Expecto Patreon. So you've probably heard by now about Joanne Rowling's transphobic tweets, unless you've been living under a rock. And
yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily like the word transphobic here, this does seem to be the nomenclature that's widely used, but on a personal level, I don't think it's transphobia, because the word phobia implies a fear of the thing. Like if you're acrophobic, then you're fearful of heights, right? That's what you're afraid of. So it's like, I don't know that phobia is the right way to describe this, but that seems to be the nomenclature that we're going with. So despite the fact that I don't think it's particularly accurate, we'll just press on.
In which case, get back under that rock, sweetie. There is nothing good going on up here. It's not worth it. Or maybe you heard that all Joanne did was say biological sex is real, and now crazy gender ideologues and trans activists are trying to silence her. This is cancel culture gone too far.
That does seem to be what's happening.
Celebrities are under attack. This is the new Salem. This is Orwell's nightmare. This is a painful topic for me all around because as a transgender woman, I am honestly hurt by a lot of the things Joanne has said in the last year. But I also know what it's like to be the target of a Twitter mob. And I realize that to most people, complaining about being canceled, it sounds incredibly whiny and self-absorbed. Like you'd especially think that rich and famous people like JK Rowling would be above staying up alone at night reading mean things people say online. But you'd think wrong. See, you underestimate the fundamental sadness of the human condition, and no amount of fame and money is gonna fix that. You know, fame alienates you from other people. It dehumanizes you in the eyes of the masses, which can actually make you feel more alone, even when people are worshiping you as a goddess. Never mind how it feels when they're hunting you as a witch. The truth is that unless you've personally experienced infamy, being shamed and shunned on a scale the human brain can't really even understand, then you just don't know what it's like, and you don't know how you'd react in that situation. But Joanne knows, and when I see her getting trashed on the TL, there's a traumatized part of me that's unironically triggered by watching people cancel her, and I want to protect. My nurturing and compassionate nature sometimes gets the best of me. But there's also part of me that wants to join the trashing. How could you do this to me, Joanne? I did not come out of the cupboard under the stairs for this. So what I want to do in this video is take Joanne's pain seriously and treat her like a complex human being, while also being critical of the things she said about the transgender question. And I also want to explore where the Twitter mob is coming from, because they're in pain too. And don't they also deserve our understanding? So without further ado,
well, I at least like Natalie's goal here. To the degree to which she will accomplish it or not is debatable, and also, for that matter, the degree to which I will accomplish that goal is debatable or not. But Natalie Wynn says she's trying, and I believe her, and I'm trying as well, and I hope you believe me. And the degree to which she treats JK Rowling as a complex human being, you can decide for yourself. The degree to which I treat Natalie Wynn as a complex human being, I guess suppose you can decide for yourself. But I'm going to try to treat Natalie Wynn as a complex human being in the same way that she is criticizing and critiquing JK Rowling. I will criticize and critique Natalie Wynn. And then people can criticize and critique me, I suppose, depending on how this debate goes. But yeah, we're trying to think here. We're trying to use our minds and trying to listen to this as best we can and try to figure out what Natalie Wynn is saying. Not that she hides the ball very much. She's pretty clear. She's very well organized. And one of the reasons I like listening to her, she has a perspective and she presents it well. So, okay, let's press on.
Let's go in with a MAC 224 tapered blending brush and see if we can find the truth. Swish and flick. So, is the author of Harry Potter a bigot? Well, she certainly seems invested in the belief that she's not a bigot.
What vice do you most despise?
Bigotry.
In looking over Joanne's tweets, I don't think the average person would see any problem with what she's said. However, I mean, not to be condescending, but I feel like the average person's understanding of transgender is still a little bit... I don't really get the whole trans thing. Like, why can't you just be a feminine man? I don't know, Amber. Why don't you be a feminine man? Who knows? You could be missing out. So we're gonna go through the things.
I have no particular objection that my understanding of transgender issues might leave a lot to be desired, which is one of the reasons I try to listen to people, because they can teach me something I don't already know, right, about these issues. Because, yeah, there's a lot here that's like, doesn't make sense to me. I spend a lot of time thinking about it and I can't make sense of it. It's like, yeah, so I'm maybe with the average person who looks at this, I'm like, this seems fine. So Natalie can tell me why it's not fine, I suppose. Okay.
That Joanna said about trans people, but I don't want this to be just a drama video or a video saying, cancel Harry Potter, drag her. Like, I want to try to do something a little bit more meaningful than that. So I'm gonna use JK Rowling as a case study in bigotry and see if we can maybe learn something about what bigotry is, how does it work, and how do otherwise good people get drawn into it? And if we can make any progress on any of those questions, well, for once I think I'll actually have earned my Patreon budget. So keeping in mind our very serious and educational purpose, let's spill some shade, throw some tea. So this all started in 2018 when Joanne liked a transphobic tweet and followed an anti-trans account. Now, in the interest of giving Joanne as much benefit of the doubt as I can, I'm not going to admit this as evidence because I don't want to do guilt by association. Strike it from the record. That was fun. I like hammering things. The real story begins in December 2019 when Joanne tweeted the hashtag #IStandWithMaya, referencing Maya Forstater. Maya Forstater is an English consultant who lost her contract with the nonprofit she worked for after she did transphobic tweets, and Maya has been kind enough to compile them all for us in her thread titled Allegedly Transphobic Tweets. Well, let's take a look and see how alleged they are.
Yes, I think that male people are not women. I don't think that being a woman or female is a matter of identity or womanly feelings. It is biology.
Another says,
some people believe that.
Right, that's basically what I think. I think that's kind of what I think. I don't know is that bigotry? I don't know if that's bigotry or not, but that's kind of what I've been saying many times too. Yeah. And then I agree with this sentiment too. Some people believe that a woman with a penis, or apologize, some people believe a person with a penis can be a woman, some don't. Right. Neither group should be discriminated against, but in situations involving taking your clothes off, integration of the two groups is not possible. Right. The two groups believe something that's fundamentally an opposite. The two groups cannot be integrated. Someone has to win this debate between the two. And it's like, yeah. And it's like, which side should win the debate? It's an interesting question, and I think it's worthy of being considered as a question. Some of the transgender advocates don't believe it's even a question. There's only one solution to this problem. I'm not sure Natalie wouldn't necessarily falls in that category or not, but it's like, yeah, there's something here that needs to be reconciled. And it's like, okay.
That a person with a penis can be a woman. Some, a majority, don't. Neither group should be discriminated against in everyday life, but in situations involving taking your clothes off for strangers, integration of the two groups is not possible.
And there's a cartoon of a hairy-armed, hairy-legged, burgeoning trans woman flashing her penis at cis women and saying, "It's all right, it's a woman's penis."
I have literally heard this from trans advocates. I have literally heard from trans advocates that women can have penises too. So, what?
So we're looking at a standard transphobia starter pack. Everyone.
How is that transphobia? I've literally heard trans advocates say this, literally, that women can have penises too. And the woman penis. I've literally, is that a bigoted position? Is it only bigoted when non-trans people say it? It's like if non-trans people take the trans people at their word, right? They say, okay, there is such a thing as a woman's penis. If the non-trans advocates take them at their word, then suddenly it becomes bigoted for the non-trans person to repeat it. How's that work? It's like only trans advocates can say it's a woman's penis, and non-trans advocates can't say it and then point out that doesn't make any sense. I don't understand.
Born female as a woman, Everyone born male is a man. Trans women are predators who prey on women, and I'm being oppressed for speaking the truth. Is this what you want, Joanne? You want to put the sorting hat on humanity and divide us up into little houses? Well, what if I'm a Gryffindor trapped in a Hufflepuff's body? What then, Joanne? What then? Okay, so why does Joanne stand with Maya? Well, if the tweet simply said, I stand with Maya, without further explanation, you could give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she just doesn't think people should lose their job for having bigoted opinions, even if she disagrees with those opinions. But if that's all she was saying, I wouldn't be making this video, would I? The full tweet reads,
Dress however you please. Call yourself whatever you like. Sleep with any consenting adult who will have you. Live your best life in peace and security. But force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real. Hashtag I stand with Maya. Hashtag this is not a drill.
Now I'm guessing that to most people, this tweet at first glance doesn't seem transphobic.
It doesn't seem transphobic, no.
Supportive of trans people, since she said we're allowed to dress however we want and call ourselves whatever crazy thing. But there's a couple things about this that don't sit right with me. First is the phrase, force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real. Sex is real is a pretty dishonest summary of what Maya said in her discrimination complaint.
Is it, though?
I believe that it is impossible to change your sex or to lose your sex. Girls grow up to be women, boys grow up to be men. No change of clothes or hairstyle, no plastic surgery, no accident or illness, no course of hormones, no force of will or social conditioning, no declaration can turn a female person into a male or a male person into a female.
Okay, so that right there like doesn't really make any sense, because Natalie Wynn says it's pretty dishonest to summarize this. It's pretty dishonest for people to summarize this as saying sex is real, or that's a softening of what was really said. Now, to me, I don't see that as fundamentally different. I mean, saying sex is real and saying this are compatible with each other, to my mind. Because if sex is real, then these things would flow from that belief, right? These would all be very consistent with that. So I don't see, personally, the idea that what she said was sex is real is an incorrect or invalid summary. It's a correct summary. These are also more explicit in their terms, but I don't see sex is real as being somehow a false or a softened view of what was really said here, to me.
Female.
If Joanne had said Maya had been fired for claiming that a person born male could never be a woman and a person born female could never be a man, that would have been more accurate, but it would also sound contentious and obviously anti-trans. Sex is real is a euphemism designed to present Maya Forstadter's transphobia as a simple statement of fact, basic common sense, which
Well, it is either a statement of fact or not. And again, you're describing it as transphobia to describe the summary as, well, this is really transphobia, but what she's describing is a fact. Like, well, either it's a fact or not. And it can't be transphobic if it's factual, right? I mean, or something. Okay.
only crazy activists and ideologues would oppose. Transphobes love to play this game where they pretend that trans people just don't understand basic biology. That's our problem. As if I did.
I don't think that. I definitely don't think that trans people don't understand basic biology. They don't think that it's controlling or dispositive, but I don't think that they fail to understand it. They just have a different conclusion from the factual understanding. So I would never claim that a trans person doesn't understand biology. I would claim that they don't think it's dispositive, which they obviously don't. And I do think it's dispositive, which I obviously do. So we draw different conclusions, but I would never say they don't understand the fact of it.
I didn't start taking female hormones because I'm acutely aware that my body is not the same as a cis woman's body, that sex is real. You will never be a woman, Nathan. Every cell in your body is male and has a Y chromosome. Really? That's crazy. How'd you learn so much about science? I don't really feel the need to have a second X chromosome. I get by with one. I make it work. I actually like the Y chromosome. I think it's a little more dainty, It's a little softer, a little more petite. The X chromosome has a lot of extra appendages, don't you think? And I don't need any more of those, thanks. No trans person thinks it's possible to change chromosomal sex, and to pretend otherwise is to argue in bad faith. When we say
Again, I don't think that any trans person thinks it's possible to change chromosomal sex. I'm not sure that there's any bigoted person out there who thinks that trans people think it's possible to change their genome. I don't think anyone thinks that about trans people. We think, well, at least I think, as a general proposition, I think that is a dispositive reality. So I think that having a Y chromosome means that you're male, and not having one means you're female. So the factual reality draws a different conclusion to me. But I don't think anyone thinks that trans people don't think it's a factual reality. They just don't think it's a dispositive fact. And I do think it's a dispositive fact. We draw different conclusions from the fact. No one thinks that trans people don't understand the basic fact, though.
Say that someone is a trans man or a trans woman, we're talking about psychological and social identity. So when transphobes say sex is real, they're not actually contradicting anything most trans people believe, except by implication. When
trans people seem to think that sex is malleable. So saying sex is real, I don't know, maybe we have maybe my side has a different impression about what that means or not. But we're like, yeah, this is not something that is malleable. So maybe sex isn't malleable would be more correct than saying sex is real. But yeah, it's a reality that can't be modified by belief, is kind of the idea. So maybe the phrase sex is real is just not the best way of phrasing it.
transphobes say sex is real, what they mean is only chromosomal sex matters. They mean they don't believe in transgender identity, which they trivialize, calling it dressing up, fashion choices, whatever you want to call yourself. When Joanne says, dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, she's belittling what it actually means to be trans, reducing it to a change of name and costume. It's similar to the language of
what does it mean to be trans?
For example, the homophobic equivalent of Joanne's tweet might read, choose whatever lifestyle you want. Indulge your sexual preferences with any consenting adult in the privacy of your own bedroom. But force Christians out of their jobs for stating that marriage is between a man and a woman? Hashtag I stand with Kim Davis. A penis and a sausage cannot make a baby. Checkmate the gays. It's just science. Homophobes
I mean, that's true as a scientific reality. Now, whether or not that should be what that should mean in practice anywhere else, but it's like, yeah, I mean, true.
Trivialize what it is to be gay. They refer to it as sexual preferences, or a lifestyle, or what you do in the bedroom. We don't tell straight people to keep their lifestyle in the bedroom. But we should. Clearly, the straights are not oppressed enough. Being gay is more than what you do in the bedroom. It's also who you love. It's part of who you are, part of your humanity. And that's something that stays with you outside of the bedroom. So to dismiss it as sexual preferences is homophobic. Likewise, being trans.
Okay, I mean, sexual preference is language or sexual orientation. But like to say that that's, well, I don't know, because I don't know the degree to which being a straight person permeates beyond my sexual orientation or sexual preference. So I don't know, because I don't know that I know the difference. But okay, maybe there's something in there somewhere.
Trans is not a costume I take off at the end of the night. It's not a fashion choice. It's not a pet name some people call me. It's part of who I am as a person, you know? It's part of my humanity. And it's also the kind of body I have, a transsexual body. So telling trans people to dress however you want is not really a supportive statement. Unless you're supporting YouTubers wearing Louis Vuitton socks in their videos apologizing for being racist, which is not valid and is in fact a hate crime. YouTubers are constantly dragging each other because we see ourselves reflected in the other, and we can't stand the sight of it. So after the Maya Forstater tweet, Joanne was silent about trans people for 6 months. But she took up the cause again in June 2019, first to complain about the use of the phrase people who menstruate in the title of an article trying to include trans men and non-binary people in a discussion of period poverty. That same night, presumably in response to her Twitter mentions being lit up by leftist teenagers who think Stalin did nothing wrong but Rachel Maddow is a war criminal, Joanne tweeted a thread again repeating the slogan that sex is real, adding,
"It isn't hate to speak the truth,"
and concluding with another backhanded statement of support.
"I respect every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them. I'd march with you if you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans."
If you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans? If? Widespread discrimination against trans people is well documented. In fact, the same week as Joanne's tweet, the Trump administration removed non-discrimination protections for trans people in healthcare and health insurance. So, are you marching with us or not, Joanne? There's a lot of stuff in these tweets that might seem innocent enough to the average person, but which to someone who understands bigotry against trans people raises a red flag. Bigotry always has a history, and in order to understand bigotry, you have to learn that history. Prejudices are made up of tropes, stereotypes, narratives, arguments, which we aren't born knowing, we have to learn them. No one is born thinking that the gays are destroying the family, or that women are naturally subservient, or that the Jews are trying to control the world economy. So if you aren't familiar with these prejudices, you might not notice anything wrong with them. He never said he hated the Jews, he is simply concerned about the overrepresentation of Jewish people in media and banking. But if you're aware, woke, if you will, then it kind of rings alarm bells when you hear someone repeating bigoted talking points. When I see Joanne tweeting about how trans people think sex isn't real and they're erasing same-sex attraction, and there's
this is something I completely agree with from JK Rowling, right? If sex isn't real, there's no such thing as same-sex attraction, right? To me, that makes complete logical sense. How can you have same-sex attraction unless sex is a thing? Right? You can't possibly have same-sex attraction unless sex is a thing. The very phrase same-sex attraction presumes sex is a thing. So when JK Rowling is saying this, I'm like, yeah, this is a truism. This seems right. And it also seems to me, and maybe this is a feeble understanding of mine, but it seems to me there's a lot of trans activists who are arguing against this proposition. And maybe they wouldn't use the phrase sex is real, so maybe, again, that's a bad way of phrasing it. But they would say things like sex is malleable, or I can be the sex I want, or, trans women are women, or trans men are men. They would argue against its solidity. And so, yeah, this statement is accurate from my perspective, and it seems to be disaccurate from trans perspectives, even if it's not phrased the way that transgender advocates would phrase it. So maybe they'd phrase it slightly differently or use slightly different language, but the sentiment is correct, to my mind.
Silencing women, alarm bells are ringing because I recognize these as familiar transphobic talking points, specifically TERF talking points. TERF means trans exclusionary radical feminism. God, are we still talking about this? I promise this is the last time. So TERFism is it's a hate movement that disguises transphobia as feminism.
See, now that's a very interesting way of putting it. To say that TERFism is a hate movement and it's merely cladding itself in the clothing of feminism, as though a wolf's in sheep clothing. So it implies a deliberate choice to be misleading. And I don't think that's true. I think the vast majority of TERFs, from what I can tell, really believe that in feminism believe that implies something, and also believe, for the TERFs at least, that if men can be feminine, it somewhat undermines the concept that women are a thing, because it erases the concept of womanhood in some respect. So I think to say, well, it's a hate movement that's merely describing itself as feminism is doing a short shift to what I think it tends to be.
Bigotry has a history. The foundational TERF text is feminist professor Janice Raymond's 1979 book, The Transsexual Empire, The Making of the Male, in which Raymond argues that, quote,
all transsexuals rape women's bodies by reducing the real female form to an artifact, appropriating this body for themselves.
Right. So I mean, I wouldn't use the word choice rape because that's a little bit aggressive, right? But you could say steal or appropriate, and you'd be right from my perspective, right? So the word choice rape is a little bit problematic because it implies something that is not, this is a little bit off. So if I were phrasing this, I'd say like appropriate or steal or borrow. So transsexuals appropriate women's bodies by reducing the female form to an artifact, right? To a series of like tropes or conventions, and thereby appropriate the body for themselves. So, right. So this is not the way I phrase the sentiment, but this accurately reflects a sentiment that I hold to some degree, because it's like, well, there is something very reductionist there. It's like you are taking what it means to be female and you are appropriating it because it doesn't belong to you. Right. So maybe that's the right way to put it. Transsexuals appropriate the concept, at least, maybe not the body. So again, the wording needs something to be desired. But transsexuals appropriate the concept of womanhood and appropriate for themselves in a way that's not appropriate because it doesn't belong to them. So the sentiment is right, if somewhat aggressively phrased.
She claims that trans women are agents of the patriarchy who, quote,
merely cut off the most obvious means of invading women.
This book set the general tone for feminist transphobia, and I bring this up because I want to give you a sense of how this kind of transphobe talks when they're not afraid of Twitter backlash.
Yeah, okay, so Cooch La Cream asks a question. How is it stealing if every bone and fiber in your entire being is telling you that you're not the sex you're born as? Appropriation is harsh. Well, I mean, the degree to which you would buy this example or not, as being a fair example, but your belief that, I mean, if we were just talking about literal property, right? Your belief that that property is yours doesn't make it true. And maybe that's an unfair example or maybe not, but like if every part of you is telling you that this is really yours, but it's not, then it's still appropriating because it's not yours. Your belief to the contrary doesn't suddenly make it true. So you might believe something belongs to you. You might believe it to the very core of you, but that doesn't make it true, would be my response to that. So, and it doesn't make it yours to do with what you wish. And maybe it's not yours, despite your belief to the contrary. So I don't know the degree to which that is helpful as an example, but yeah, wishing doesn't make it so would be another way to say that. Wishing for a thing does not make it true. Yeah, I mean, yeah. All right, so pressing on.
Typical male narcissist, Nathan manipulates his cultish audience into thinking he's the victim of the big ol' meanie TERFs. If you keep calling me Nathan, I'm gonna call you Nigel. Cheerio, old chap. Or whatever you people say. Here's the thing, Nigella. Bigotry can be mean, yes, and it usually is when bigots think they can get away with it. But it's vital to recognize that being mean is not the essence of bigotry. Bigotry can be hateful, yes, but specifically, bigotry is hate that poses a political threat to the target group. The fundamental problem with TERFs is not that they're mean, it's that they're politically reactionary. They want to reverse the progress of trans liberation. In the final chapter of The Transsexual Empire, Raymond lays out her solution to the trans question, quote,
"The problem of transsexualism would be best served by morally mandating it out of existence. I believe that the elimination of transsexualism is not best achieved by legislation prohibiting transsexual treatment and surgery, but rather by legislation that limits it. I would favor restricting the number of hospitals and centers where transsexual surgery could be performed. The kind of counseling to pass successfully as masculine or feminine that now reigns in gender identity clinics only reinforces the problem of transsexualism."
She goes on to argue for alternative feminist consciousness-raising therapies, admitting,
"I am not so naive as to think that they will make transsexualism disappear overnight, but they would at least pose the existence of a real alternative."
And also, just to be fair to the point earlier, this is going back a step, but to be fair to the concept of this from the right, or from right-wing thinking about appropriating sex, right? And that being legitimate or not. So the left would say, first of all, it's not appropriation, and even if it was, we could. And then, so what would be the left-wing equivalent of that? Would be cultural appropriation, right? So the right would say, it's not appropriation, and even if it was, we can. So the left would scream, so at least some members on the left, I guess, again, when you talk about left and right in broad terms, obviously you're being a little over-inclusive. But yeah, so the left will talk about cultural appropriation, and the right will say, it's not appropriation, and even if it was, we can do that. And then the left will talk about appropriating sex, and the left will say, it's not appropriation, and even if it was, we can do that. So you do see this kind of argument from both perspectives about different issues to some degree. So interesting juxtaposition there.
To be explored and tried.
So, like homophobes, TERFs have historically advocated a kind of conversion therapy aimed at eliminating transsexual identity and behavior. And like the anti-abortion movement, they recognize it's not yet politically practical to completely make illegal a medical procedure they don't like. So they settle for making it as difficult as possible to get one. In 1980, Janice Raymond authored a report to the Department of Health and Human Services repeating her arguments against transsexualism, which was cited in the 1981 decision that Medicare would not cover transition-related health care. That decision wasn't overturned until 2014. So there's real political consequences to bigotry. It's not just a matter of being mean. Polite bigotry can be just as dangerous. Unlike Janice Raymond,
apparently so, because I was banned by ContraPoint's Discord server for essentially being polite bigotry. Although I wasn't talking about transgender issues at the time, I was talking about Jordan Peterson at the time. And I was banned because even though I was exceptionally polite, it's like, well, it doesn't matter how polite you are, you still have the wrong thing. I was banned by ContraPoint's server. A point I'm still a little bit grumpy about, to be honest, because I was trying to have a discussion and that didn't work well. Okay, pressing on.
JK Rowling seems totally convinced, and very intent on convincing all of us, that she's a totally progressive LGBT ally who loves and supports trans people, while in the same breath, spewing transphobic arguments. She's constantly saying things like, I know and love trans people, but I'd march with you if you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans. At the same time, none of the gender-critical women I've talked to hates trans people. On the contrary, many of them became interested in this issue in the first place out of concern for trans youth.
I think concerns about trans youth are fully legitimate, particularly when it comes to sex surgery for youth. There's issue of ability to consent that are very real there. As a standard legal theory, for example, you wouldn't say that a child, a person under 18, can't consent to surgery in general because they don't have the capacity to consent. They don't have the capacity to make those decisions. And a guardian or parent has to make them for them. And if the parent or guardian is, making it out of false reasons, then you can get a guardian ad litem appointed by the court, for example, if the parent is making a inappropriate decision, but still they can't consent in and of themselves. That doesn't make sense. So when the idea that a kid or someone who's under 18, we say, well, they can't consent to surgery. They don't have the capacity to consent. And then they say, but they can consent to this particular surgery, even if the parents don't want them to, because the parents are bigoted. It's like, that doesn't quite make sense to some of us on the right, for example. It's like, how are we juxtaposing these two ideas at the same time?
A lot of people have a hard time noticing this kind of bigotry, and I think one reason for that is that our common understanding of bigotry is very narrow. People think of bigotry as like judging a group instead of an individual, which is of course a horrible thing to do. I don't care for the English. They're sick people. Or people think of bigotry as hate, something inhuman and monstrous. So when people hear the word bigot, they're expecting someone like Lord Voldemort, some uber-Nazi who despises love and friendship. But the problem with the Nazis was not that they hated love and friendship, right? They believed they were defending German blood and soil against Marxist Bolshevism and Jewish contamination. And what were we supposed to do? Not defend the Reich against Polish atrocities? That's how a Nazi actually thinks, right? It's not that they hate friendship. No, they have their own internal logic of victimization and self-righteousness. So when you reduce bigotry to a caricature of pure hatred, you obscure that bigotry is a deeply human problem. You know, sometimes people criticize me for empathizing with bigots, but I believe that understanding bigots is the best defense against becoming one yourself. Because when you dehumanize the villains, you become unable to recognize the villain within.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, Jordan Peterson talks about this idea too. He talks about it from a Jungian perspective of confronting the shadow and finding out the shadow and finding the monster and all that stuff. So some of that is reflected in Jungian psychology, and Jordan Peterson talks about this idea too, about really finding the shadow and integrating the shadow. And of course, Jung talked about it first. But yeah, you know, that's right. Fundamentally, it's like you have to check yourself before you wreck yourself, you know? And that's also, incidentally, why I'm listening to this video, because I could be making a mistake somewhere along the way. I could be making a mistake in some fundamental proposition. I could be wrong. And I want to listen to someone. It's like, why am I wrong? Please help me. Please help me be less stupid. I'd love to be less stupid. Why am I making a mistake? And I'm trying to give it credit for what it's worth. It's like, yeah, it's like, so yeah, Natalie is almost certainly right about the Germans and the Nazis in general. I mean, some of them were probably pretty evil, but a lot of them, especially for the masses, probably not so much. They did have an internal logic that led to some very uncomfortable results. And so it's a good reason to check my own internal logic and for everyone to check their own internal logic to avoid making those kinds of catastrophic errors. Yeah.
How is she, though? She needs a hot toddy is what she needs. Metal straw because I love the environment. I'm so good. I'm really fucking good. The idea that bigotry is simply hate, I call the Westboro Baptist Church theory of bigotry. It's the idea that bigots are people who outright say, we hate you, God hates you, and we're all marching around with signs about how much we hate you. Like the bad guys in that Taylor Swift video. Taylor Swift. Everyone wants to be a gay icon now. Well, I don't. I don't want to be a gay icon. I'm just stuck with you people. Just kidding.
Christine is a math nerd. Hello, Christine is a math nerd. Yeah, Christine is a math nerd. Says, you're not listening, you're arguing. You're justifying. You're hearing your words for the purpose of opposing them. You're not internalizing or examining your beliefs. Well, I don't know the degree to which that's true or not. I suppose you can decide for yourself, but I'm listening and trying to present my own perspective. And I'm trying to listen and work through it in real time. So I'm like, okay, here's what she says. Here's what I think. And I'm like, I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to internalize it. I'm trying to challenge my own beliefs. And I'm like, okay, here's what she says, here's what I think. And I don't know a better way to go about this than this, Christine. I don't understand what it would mean otherwise to be listening. Unless you mean by listening means agreeing. So if what listening means is agreeing, then I guess not. But to quote Toby Ziegler from The West Wing, I'm listening, understanding, and disagreeing all at the same time. Or at least I think I am. So I don't know what it would mean to listen other than to hear the words, process them, consider it, and offer my perspective on it. So I don't know what it would mean to listen otherwise, unless you mean to listen means agreeing. So I don't know how to listen any better than this. I'm literally listening to the words, processing them, trying to understand them, and trying to offer my perspective. What else would it mean to listen to somebody? I don't quite get it. So,
Shade never made anybody less gay. This isn't shade, Taylor. Shade is JK Rowling telling trans people, sleep with any consenting adult who have you. Bigotry is a lot more complicated than just hate. And the video for You Need to Calm Down is just so emblematic of this misconception. Taylor takes the subject of homophobia and turns it into yet another song about haters. But in the real world, backwoods hillbillies stomping around with misspelled signs are not really the problem. The most dangerous bigots are highly sophisticated and powerful people. And yeah, there are still blatant homophobes who say it's an abomination, these perverts are spreading AIDS, they're destroying the family, they're recruiting children. But these days, it's much more common to hear, of course I love gay people. Some of my best friends struggle with same-sex attraction, but it's not homophobic to not want LGBT ideology promoted in schools to children as young as 3 years old. Why, it's a full-on assault on religious liberty. I'm a good convincing homophobe, don't I? There's really two different styles of bigotry. They express the same prejudice, but they're very different in tone. I'll call the two styles direct bigotry and indirect bigotry. Direct bigotry is openly contemptuous. It's a bigotry manifested in slurs and outright discrimination and demonizing the target group, and calls for shunning, subordination, or even violence. Whereas indirect bigotry manifests as concern or debate about a host of proxy issues. It's often defensive in tone rather than offensive. Frequently the claim is that a once needed liberation movement has now gone too far, that it's now the activists who are the new oppressors, who are disturbing law and order with violent and chaotic protests, who are victimizing and silencing innocent people by calling them bigots, who are infiltrating the media and replacing good old-fashioned entertainment with politically correct propaganda. And of course, ordinary people are too intimidated to speak out against it because cancel culture is out of control and free.
Now, what I find really interesting about this indirect bigotry argument is that I think, and I'm not saying this to merely be contrarian, but I think you could fairly describe Natalie Wynn's own video in these terms, right? She seems to be debating proxy issues as well. She's definitely defending something. She's defending transgender ideas. She's defending free speech, and she's definitely argued about cancel culture. She had an entire video about it when she was being canceled by cancel culture. So a lot of these concepts seem to fairly apply to Natalie Wynn herself. So I wouldn't accuse Natalie Wynn of being bigoted. I don't think she's bigoted, but the way that she's describing bigotry by her own terms would seem to apply to her in large part. So I don't know what's going on there.
Free speech is under attack. The direct bigot is always frothing at the mouth, ranting and raving about predators, perverts, invaders, rapists, brutish animals, vermin, rats, roaches, contagions. Whereas the indirect bigot is always defending something, always a knight in shining armor, defending women, defending the children, defending marriage, defending freedom, defending the family, defending our values, defending common sense, defending tradition, defending civilization itself, defending God. He's all powerful, but he could really use your help, Mary. I think a lot of...
I mean, if defending itself is a symptom of indirect bigotry, then Natalie Wynn herself is, of course, defending various things. She might be defending different things, but she's definitely defending something. as you know, some of her own criticism seems to apply to her as well. It's like, yeah, she might not be defending the same things, but she's defending things. You know, she's defending people's ability to make choices about themselves, defending people's ability to be free in their expression, defending people, you know, and so forth and so on. So it's like there's something very off about that to my mind.
People take a borderline heroic view of themselves, and indirect bigotry flatters that self-image. Indirect bigotry often replaces the actual people it targets with some big abstract concept. Instead of Jewish people, they claim to be against Zionist-occupied government. Instead of women, they claim to hate feminazis or the friend zone. Gay people are depersonified as the gay agenda. Trans people become transgenderism, gender ideology, trans activists. What they're really against is equality, but they don't say that. In fact, they may not even think it. But they tell on themselves when they react with instinctive hostility to anyone who agitates for change. It's not racist to think that Black Lives Matter thugs shouldn't disrespect the national anthem. A book called The Anatomy of...
I don't know that that's necessarily racist, and it's not, and at least for me, I've been fairly consistent on applying that to the right wing too, right? That's why we're doing the whole FBIT hour. So yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I don't mind them doing it on their own time, but I did take a bit of exception to doing it in sports games because it defeats the purpose of the game, right? The game itself is a diversion. So I don't really necessarily mind them doing it on their own time, but doing it in the middle of the game is a bit problematic for me. In terms of like trying to be even and fair to both sides, it's like I was against the Antifa rioting. I'm also against the right-wing rioting. Amazing, right? Trying to be actually consistent in your positions. It's like, yeah, I didn't really very much like it when Black Lives Matter and Antifa was burning things and pillaging and taking over parts of cities and having the Chaz Chop Summer of Love. Didn't really very much approve of that very much. And I also don't very much approve of the rioters in DC, and that even though those are a lot of right-wing people, because whoa, amazingly, I'm consistent. And it's like, yep, don't really care for the rioting and for the civil unrest and the looting and the burning and the pillaging. Don't really care if it's right-wing, don't really care if it's left-wing. Everyone can suffer the rule of law. It's like, yep. It's like, so a lot of the people who rioted, however, might be very inconsistent with their beliefs, hence the rioting. Because I bet a lot of those people thought the Antifa and BLM riots were super bad as they were breaking into the Capitol. But I'm trying to be fairly consistent over here. Okay, let's press on.
Prejudices by Elizabeth Young Brule really helped me with this video. One of the points she makes is that a lot of the time, bigotry is backlash.
Ideologies of desire are, generally, backlashes against movements of equality. They are regressive prejudices that reinstate inequalities and distinctions when the force of movements for equality has been registered and, often unconsciously, rejected. Prejudice replaces social barriers of another kind.
Bigotry is not just the psychological state of hating a group of people. Bigotry is political. It's a reaction to changing demographics, or to liberation movements, or to changing power relations between groups. A lot of casual misogynists don't exactly hate women in the literal psychological sense. It's more that they feel threatened by the prospect of the social and political equality of women. In fact, I would argue that feeling threatened is the distinctive psychological experience of bigotry, much more so than feeling hateful. So bigotry is reactive, and it changes along with the circumstances it's a reaction to. 1950s misogyny still has some things in common with 2020s misogyny. For example, a lot of men still feel some need to control women's sexuality and women's bodies, but it's also changed a lot as gender relations have shifted in the last 70 years. The idea that women are naturally suited to domestic servitude is a lot less prevalent than it used to be. And transphobia is a prejudice that's getting much louder, because in the last decade, trans liberation has increased our visibility. People are running into us at work now. They're having to use our pronouns. They're seeing us in politics or in media, and not just as laughingstocks or monsters like we used to be. but as actual characters. And a lot of people are not very happy about it. They feel threatened. That must be super fucking hard for you. Prejudice replaces social barriers of another kind. So JK Rowling frames her position as, I am just saying the fact that sex is real. It's not hateful.
Oh, Christine is the math nerd. Says, can you share where you found the 1% statistic? Oh, it was based on an estimate of the total number of people that went to the Trump rally, because the numbers that I'd seen were in the high tens of thousands as the estimate for total number of people who went to the Trump rally, and the FBI Department of Justice has estimated that about 800 to 1,000 people went into the Capitol building. So I was basing the 1% number on the total number of people who attempted the Trump rally based on estimates that I saw relating to that about how many people attended versus how many people actually entered the building. So it was just math that I basically did. It could be a little bit more than that, but you're looking at about 1% because about 800 to 1,000 people went into the Capitol building and somewhere about 80,000 to 100,000 people attended the rally based on various estimates. So that's roughly 1%. But yeah, that's where I came up with the number just by doing math.
To say a fact. Why is everyone so mad at me? A fact can't be bigoted. And I agree that a fact cannot be bigoted, but a fact on its own doesn't mean very much. Usually when we discuss facts, we're using those facts to tell a story. And facts can be used to tell bigoted stories. You know, suppose someone tweets the
10,000 people, 1,000 in the building is 10%. Yeah, but I didn't say 10,000. I said tens of thousands. Like the estimates I saw were around 80 to 100,000. So 800 out of 80,000 would be 1%. 1,000 out of 100,000 would be 1%. So roughly 1% based on the estimates of the crowd. There weren't 10,000 people who attended the rally. There were a lot more than 10,000 people who attended the rally. Roughly 1% seems to be right.
Fact that the homicide rate is higher for Black Americans than white Americans. I'm gonna ask, what story are you trying to tell with this fact? What political goal are you trying to support? One way indirect bigotry works is by camouflaging political struggles as intellectual debates. When Joanne says sex is real, she sounds like she's staking out a position in the trans debate.
Right.
Which is then presented as an intellectual conflict.
So these are the questions I ask all the time because I try to have this intellectual discussion. And I've asked these questions many, many times on stream. And every time I ask these questions, I just wind up in these circles because the definitions kind of conflict with each other. But yeah, I ask these questions all the time. For me, I think it is an intellectual conflict, at least as far as I've tried to examine my own prejudices as best I can. I've tried to examine my own biases as best I can. For me, it's an intellectual conflict. It is an intellectual conflict, as best as I can determine. You know, being as honest about who I am and being as honest about my biases as I know how to be and being introspective as I know how to be. For me, it is an intellectual debate because I ask these kinds of questions all the time because the answers don't make sense. Well, less on the why question because I don't really care that much about the why as the definitions because why is a different level of question. I don't necessarily care so much about why people are trans. I mean, we can figure that out. Probably some combination of genetics and whatever. It doesn't. Why is true doesn't matter as much to me, but what it is matters a lot more. Because it's like saying why is someone gay or why is someone straight. I'm not sure the why really matters that much. Why it's true, it doesn't matter as much for me. But what does it mean to be a woman? Yeah. Or what does it mean to be a man? Yeah. Is sex the same as gender? Yeah. Who is a true trans? These are, to my mind, very, very good questions. I've asked them many, many times and not found very good answers.
About the metaphysics of gender instead of what it really is, which is a political conflict about the social equality of transgender people. And the effectiveness of that strategy is actually a reason I'm not a huge fan of the slogan, trans women are women. And this is just my opinion, I don't speak for any other trans people, but there's a couple things I don't like about it. One is trans men and non-binary people matter just as much as trans women, but you don't as often hear trans men are men, or non-binary people are valid doesn't really work, does it? The other problem with trans women are women is it tends to invite the response, well, what does it even mean to be a woman? Define womanhood. And
Yeah, which I think is a very, very good question. Right. I think it's an exceptional question. What does it mean to be a woman? What is womanhood? And for no other reason than from a legal perspective. From a legal perspective, these things matter. Because asking like, what is a woman it is and must be a legal question because we're going to have to define rules and laws around it. So asking like, what is a woman is as much a valid question as in the First Amendment, what is speech? In the Second Amendment, what are arms? In the Fourth Amendment, what is unreasonable? Right? And if you want the answers to those questions, well, I can point you to many, many law books that have gone to some length to answer these questions because we have to define our terms and what we're talking about. So this isn't just semantics for me. This is also like some legal questions because when we start talking about this, it's like, well, if we're going to do things around transgenders and modify the legal domain, right? Because that's the political aspect of this. So there's a political aspect to this, which is also legal in its nature because people want to modify the law, which is fine. Maybe we should modify the law. But wanting to know what we're modifying it to and what do we mean by certain terms and what are we even talking about are perfectly valid legal questions. Because what are we even talking about? What do we mean? What do we mean by these terms? And ideally, we want to define them up front if we're the legislature, right? Because just saying transgender and leaving it to the courts to figure out is not necessarily the most ideal solution, or leaving it to some agency to figure out, not necessarily the most ideal solution. So maybe we should have some idea of what we're talking about up front when we're writing these things. Because otherwise courts and or regulatory agencies have to figure it out, and that gets really messy really fast. So there's all that. Yeah.
now you're immediately getting baited into some bullshit semantic debate about what is a real woman. A real woman. How do you know you're a real woman, Amber? What if you're in the Matrix right now, and in the real world, you're biologically male? The tables are turned. It doesn't really matter, does it?
It kind of matters because, again, we're going to have to organize society and reality around these things. And it's like, I am a woman. It's like, okay, what does it mean to be a woman? How do you know you're a woman? These questions matter to me. I don't think they're just semantic. I think there's law behind this. Or it seems to me that there's legal implications, especially if we're making political arguments and statutes need to be changed. What exactly are we talking about? It's like trying to have some understanding about this when we're writing or we're modifying rules seems very important. So I don't think it's merely a semantic debate. I think that it matters. Again, it's like asking the First Amendment, what is speech? And how do you know that? And what is the basis of that? And how do you know what speech is? And so forth and so on. It's like, how much time do you have? Because I can go into some length on that. Or any other many, many constitutional questions. And if we're going to pass a statute, man, it's like, yeah, we have to understand this thing from a whole bunch of angles. You know, what exactly are we talking about? This is, yeah. DIR says, one thing I feel the trans community fails to recognize is those who are not trans do not understand how not feeling like your birth gender is. Yeah, we don't even completely understand what that would mean. What does it feel like to not be your birth gender? What does it feel like to be a woman? What does that even mean? How would you know that you feel like a woman? What does that even mean? Do I feel like a man? How do I know if I feel like a man? What does it mean to feel like I mean, these questions matter to me. There's an intellectual thing there. It's like I'm not quite understanding exactly what we're talking about. And yeah. What makes me a man? To me, what makes me a man? The fact that I have a Y chromosome. But that's my definitions. For me, it's easy. I have a Y chromosome, therefore I'm male. It worked. Easy. It's clear. It's uniform. It makes sense. So you asking me for my definition? There you go. Okay, great. Let's move on.
This is metaphysics, and life is too short for metaphysics. You know, I've been down this road too many times already, and I always end up having these dead-end conversations about gender performativity, or worse, conversations about what it means to feel like a woman. Well, the truth is, I don't feel like a woman. I don't think anyone feels like a woman, honestly, except a certain subgenre of gay men, and possibly Shania Twain. Probably not even her anymore, honestly. Not since the early 2000s. You know, some questions.
So if you don't feel like a woman, why do you think you're trans? And I'm trying to say that with as much genuineness as I know how to offer. It's like, if you don't feel like a woman, why do you feel trans? I'm confused.
Should be dissolved rather than solved.
Intersex people? What about intersex people? My definition was all encompassing. If you have a Y chromosome, you're male. If not, you're female. That covers every possible use case. What about intersex people? Okay.
That's what Wittgenstein said. That's right, we're dragging Ludwig into this. Sometimes the only way to answer a question is to realize you're asking the wrong question. How do I know I'm a woman? Well, look at me. Oh, I rest my case.
So you can know someone if someone's a woman by looking at them? Is that what you're saying? Like, how do you know you're a woman? Look at me. So it's like, I know you're a woman because I'm looking at you, which means that women look particular ways and don't look other particular ways, which means that presumably the way you look is how a woman could look and not how a man could look. A man couldn't look this way. So you're saying that certain manners of dress and by just merely looking at you, I can make the conclusion. So there's some manners of dress and some manners of aesthetic that belong to women and some not to men. That's interesting, because I thought the classic feminist argument is that women can dress any way they want and behave any way they want. But you're saying, no, by looking at you alone, I can determine you're female. Okay. It's a joke? Well, maybe it is a joke, but I'm just I'm taking her literally. Maybe she is joking. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is a joke. I'm just listening to what she's saying, literally. We're trying to. Maybe you're right.
The monitor's over here. That's what I'm looking at when I look over here. I like to check in occasionally, see how I'm doing. Look, trans people can't even agree among our...
Brittany says, for clarity, would you consider the rare person born XXY to be male? Yes. Right. If you have a Y chromosome, you're male. If not, you're female. Right. It covers every possible use case. Do you have a Y chromosome? You're male. Does an XXY person have a Y chromosome? Yes, then they're male. Right. I've provided a definition that is all-encompassing and covers every possible case. Excellent.
Ourselves what gender is. In fact, if you even try to answer the question, you end up enraging some part of the community who feels excluded. So no, trans people are not trying to force an ideology on people. We don't even share an ideology within our own community. What we share are a common set of political struggles against discrimination, against harassment, against excessive medical gatekeeping, against exclusion from public life. So what would be a better slogan than trans women are women? Well, ideally, something that includes all trans people and something that evades pointless philosophizing about biology and what is gender and who is true trans and what is a woman really. Something that centers what actually matters, which is freeing trans people from the stigma and discrimination that have historically prevented us from becoming equal members of society. So I know it sounds kind of outdated, very 1970s, but I personally like the slogan, trans liberation now. It's short, it's sweet, and instead of prompting, define womanhood, it prompts people to ask, what do you mean liberation? Liberation from what? And then you can say, well, I'll tell you. And now you're talking about politics instead of talking about semantics. Isn't that better? I feel like trans culture is...
Well, I mean, it depends what level of the argument you want to have the discussion on. I mean, you can go to the ultimate political end, right? So I think about this issue a lot. I think about this issue a lot about where's the right level to have the discussion or debate. And I think as a general proposition, although not always, but as a general proposition, it's more helpful to have debates higher up in the logical path. Because I think that as a general proposition, when you're arguing end policy, when you have disagreements, you don't understand why. Because you think that there's only one chain of logic and they must be disagreeing with you at the end point of the analysis. So whatever point of the analysis you're arguing at implies that's the point you're disagreeing at. And that might not be true. So if you're discussing the end policy, and you're disagreeing, it's like, you must have made some mistake in logic, or you must have made something, or we're quibbling over a very fine detail when that might not be true. So I think it's more helpful probably to have the debate at the right level of the analysis. Where's the right level of the analysis? The point that you're actually having the disagreement. And so if your disagreement is up the chain, then it's probably more helpful to have the argument where you're actually disagreeing rather than way down in the policy area. I think about this issue, for example, when it comes to abortion, because if you say pro-choice or pro-life, for example, that implies like you agreed on the chain. I mean, both ways it implies you agreed on the chain and you're just disagreeing at the end, and you must have made some fundamental problem. It's like, no, we actually disagreed much further up the chain, and we should have the argument much higher up the hierarchy and try to figure out some of these root issues, and that would be more productive. So I don't think I agree here that it's necessarily the good idea to have the argument at the end of policy or the end result, because I'm not sure that's where the most productive conversation can be had. Quirky Beauty says, I really appreciate you trying to understand. That's, I'm doing the best I can. I'm doing the best I know how to do. I'm trying to listen to someone who disagrees with me. I'm trying to listen to what they say. I'm trying to consider it, and I'm trying to respond to it with my own thoughts. And I'm trying to listen as best as I can, or as best as I know how. And I'm trying to listen to it critically and trying to analyze it and trying to just deal with this as best as I know how. And I'm really trying to think. And honestly, it makes my brain hurt a little bit. Because when I really, really think intensely, like when a brain is really fired up, it starts to actually like result in some sort of pain a little bit. Because like you're thinking so hard. But, anyways, I'm trying as best as I know how and trying to consider this. So, yeah.
Just so obsessed with reassuring ourselves that we are valid that we sometimes forget that the end goal of a political movement is not validity, it's equality. That's what we're supposed to be fighting for. So instead of asking, does JK Rowling think we're valid, which who fucking cares if she thinks we're valid? Well, maybe I care a little bit. But instead, why don't we ask, is she or is she not an ally in our struggle for equality? Doesn't that just bring reality back into focus? Isn't it so much better to have a concrete political project in front of you instead of sinking?
I mean, even if we're going to have the debate at that level, we could ask questions like, what do you mean? What do we mean by equality? Equal in what respects? What respects are they not equal? How would it become equal? What would that mean exactly? And we could have discussions there, but even then we have to define our terms a little bit. It's like, do you mean, for example, that any biological male who believes that they're a woman should be able to compete in women's sports? Doesn't that destroy women's sports to some degree? What does that mean? What does that destroy Title IX? I do think the Biden administration seems to be going down that way, because they seem to be going under the idea that trans women should be able to compete in women's sports. So what's left for women's sports? Okay.
Into this scholastic gender theology, trans people are a population of people who have a right to equality and to freedom from discrimination. We are not an ideology that's up for debate. But that's how JK Rowling frames the trans question, not as a struggle for equality that she opposes, but as an ideology that she disagrees with. I'm just saying that sex is real. Is that all you're saying, Joanne?
I don't quite understand what Natalie Wynn is going for here when she says that that me or JK Rowling is going after ideology. Where I don't quite understand, or we say that trans is an ideology. I don't know if it's an ideology. I wouldn't really conceive of it in those terms. But it does seem to have some ideology behind it in some respects, because it's like, at least to the degree, and I mean to the degree that a trans person thinks that they are a woman, it has what is the idea that is womanhood, right? So that's an ideology. Like what is the idea that is manhood? So that's an ideology. So there's some ideology elements there. I don't think you consider trans people as such to be an ideology, but there is some ideology baked into some of those concepts. And so by making statements or by asking questions, we are trying to figure out the ideological elements that are implicit in some of it, I think. All right.
Remember that scene in the Goblet of Fire in the prefect's bathroom? Moaning Myrtle, hey, how are you? I wonder if that inspired my love of baths. This bath is actually really nice. It's a lot of milk and a lot of rose oil, Epsom salts, just kind of everything that's good in baths all together. I don't want to talk about bigotry. I want to talk about baths. Can this just be a video about baths from now on?
It can be.
Oh, fine, I'll do my job. On June 10, JK Rowling published an essay to her website, which on Twitter she titled Turf Wars, which was just awarded the Russell Prize by the BBC for its brave display of unyielding transphobia, I guess. The essay is several pages long and outlines her reasons for speaking out on sex and gender issues.
Yeah, Christina is a math nerd, says, I'd love for you to have a trans person on as a guest to discuss the new changes. Fair enough. I have no particular objection to that. It would require a trans person who's willing to have the discussion with me, which ContraPoints seems to have been long sick of by her own terms. So ContraPoints seems to not be interested in questions like, what is it a woman? Or she's had the discussion so many times and she's found it to be fruitless. So it would require having a conversation who's willing to actually have a conversation, which could be problematic. And what are the parameters of what we're talking about? And it would require someone who's willing for me to ask them questions that might, to some degree, or more than that, potentially, challenge their validity on some level. Because there's some things like I don't quite understand what we're talking about on some level. But I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it if there was someone that would be willing to have the conversation. Because it's something I want to understand. And I don't understand it. There's something I don't understand. Now, maybe it's because I don't feel that way. And maybe that's what the root of it is. Because I don't feel that way, I don't understand it. And maybe I'm trying to intellectualize something that's a feeling. And maybe that's part of the problem. Or at least it could be. It's like I'm trying to make, and it's not really intellectual. So maybe the entire idea of trying to intellectualize it is wrong on some level. But I don't know what else to do, because I obviously don't have the feelings. So I can acknowledge your feelings, but since I don't have the feelings, I can't share those feelings. So all that's left for me is to try to intellectualize it, because I can't feel what you're feeling. I can't force myself to feel a particular way. So all that's left for me is to try to intellectualize it. And so I'd have to find someone who's willing to do that. But if you know someone out there who'd be willing to do that, then that's cool. I'd be willing to have someone on and try to talk about what we're talking about to some degree. So ContraPoints doesn't seem like she's interested in that, because she seems like she's had that debate or discussion many, many times and found it fruitless to the point that she can't be bothered anymore, which I totally understand, because she's had the discussion intellectually and it's reached points of dead ends, which I totally understand, because every time I've tried to have the discussion, it's also reached dead ends for me. So I totally get it. But at least I'm still willing to have the discussion for the moment until I just totally give up. Haven't reached the give up point, but yeah, so maybe.
I refuse to bow down to a movement that I believe is doing demonstrable harm in seeking to erode women as a political and biological class and offering to cover predators like few before it.
Where do I even begin with this one? Well, let's pick some highlights.
Woman is not a costume. Woman is not an idea in a man's head. Woman is not a pink brain, a liking for Jimmy Choos, or any of the other sexist ideas now somehow touted as progressive.
Oh, well, my mistake. Here I was, thinking I was a woman. Turns out I'm just a man who likes expensive shoes. What a whimsical misunderstanding. Okay, well, that's it, everyone. The channel's over. Thanks for the likes and comments. I'm gonna head out now to the Jimmy Choo store, and then I guess I'll cut my tits off. Joanne! Joanne! This is madness, Joanne.
When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he's a woman, and, as I've said, gender confirmation certificates may now be granted without any need for surgery or hormones, then you open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside.
So look, I understand that some women are anxious about the thought of predators in bathrooms. And believe me, I don't want to share a bathroom with a predator any more than you do. Why are all my rose petals on this one side? Some of them need to come over here. Come here. I've redistributed the petals. Socialist icon. But this talking point that gender change on legal documents will enable predators to enter bathrooms, it doesn't really make sense, because gender policing in public bathrooms doesn't involve legal documents. Like, when was the last time you had to present a gender certificate to gain admittance to a public bathroom? This feels like a strangely outdated conversation to be having during pandemic lockdown. Like, imagine using a public bathroom. Imagine being in public. I've been reading this book called Female Masculinity, which is about the experiences of butch women. And there's a section here called The Bathroom Problem, which describes how women's bathrooms
tend to operate as an area for the enforcement of gender conformity.
The author, Jack Halberstam, who's assigned female at birth and presents masculine, describes routinely having security called on him for using the women's bathroom.
Having one's gender challenged in the women's restroom is a frequent occurrence in the lives of many androgynous or masculine women. Indeed, it is so frequent that one wonders whether the category woman, when used to designate public functions, is completely outmoded. Queer literature is littered with references to the bathroom problem, and it would not be an exaggeration to call it a standard feature of the butch narrative.
And that's very interesting to me because, as a feminine trans woman, I have not once been questioned or had the authorities called on me in a women's public bathroom in the entire time I've been using them, which is several years now. So when JK Rowling, a feminine heterosexual woman, calls for more bathroom policing to protect the lesbians or whatever, it just seems ignorant of the way bathroom policing actually works. Like, is she just so famous that she doesn't use public bathrooms anymore and she forgot how they work? How much could one bathroom entry certificate cost, Michael? $10? Women's bathrooms are policed according to femininity, not chromosomes. And there's no practical way to change that short of stationing a genital inspector in every stall, just to make sure no one's privacy is violated. That's a very good idea, Joanne. That's very good.
Ironically, radical feminists aren't even trans exclusionary. They include trans men in their feminism because they were born women.
Isn't it ironic that supposedly transphobic feminists think that trans men are women? Hello, operator. Could you get me Alanis Morissette? I have a new incident to report. So look, I could keep refuting points made in Turf Wars, which is basically just a series of common transphobic canards we've all heard 100 times before. But I want to focus in particular on some passages that I think are very revealing.
See, it's something very dismissive, and I understand why it's dismissive, but nevertheless, there's something very dismissive by just calling them canards. Like, there's no legitimacy behind them. There's just tropes and canards with no real validity. Or they're just mere talking points. It's like, no, these are things that people are thinking. And maybe they're wrong, but, because I could be wrong. But to call them canards is dismissive. And I understand why, because you fundamentally disagree with them. So you think that they're canards. But of course, someone who disagrees with you could describe the things that you're saying as being canards, and that wouldn't really be fair either. So,
about the psychology of transphobia. What is it about the transgenders that some people feel threatened by? Well, JK Rowling gives us a lot to work with in answering that question. You know, Joanne being a TERF is mostly terrible for trans people, but maybe the silver lining is that the most famous novelist in the world having a public transphobic breakdown is providing a wealth of insight about the interior world of a transphobe. In TERF Wars, Joanne claims her interest in the trans issue is intensely personal, and she has two reasons why it's personal. The first is she thinks that if she had been a child today, she would have been transed. Someone would have transed her. You know, people are being transed left and right these days. It's a reasonable thing to be concerned about. Trans people were always on the lookout.
it's kind of a reasonable thing to be concerned about. There does seem to be a huge uptake in trans, and only of a particular generation, incidentally, the younger generation. So if it was merely because it's more acceptable to be trans now, then you would expect that more adults would come out as trans. I mean, you would expect it, because if it's just more acceptable, then they'd be free to express themselves. But you're not really seeing that. You're seeing it much more in the youth. You're seeing it much more in childs, where you're seeing this huge uptake. You're not really seeing a lot of 60-year-olds, for example, come out as trans. I mean, it does happen, but not in the proportions it does to the young. So it does seem that there's something, what would be the right way to put this? That there's something like, something where people might think that something is true even though it's not, because other people think it's true. So there's a peer pressure kind of thing to some degree. And also because it's a good way to get acceptance and validation. And so, you know, I think it's a valid thing to be concerned about, because the numbers seem off. And so something might not be real here, especially when we're talking about surgery or hormone replacement, things like that have potentially long-lasting effects.
For the next person we can trans. That's all we want to do. Is trans people. I transed 4 people this morning before I ate breakfast. She thinks that she would have been recruited by the transsexual empire and forced to take hormones by the dark cabal of endocrinologists. And in support of this speculation, Joanne rehashes a bunch of transphobic tropes about social contagion and a quote,
4,400% increase in girls being referred for transitioning treatment.
And that sounds pretty alarming, right? 4,400%. But you have to keep in mind that 10 years ago, only 32 assigned female patients under 18 were referred. And by last year, that number was 1,740.
That's a lot.
With the biggest increase happening 5 years ago, you know, the transgender tipping point year. So that is a big increase, but it corresponds to the biggest ever increase in trans visibility. So it does make sense. And there's 11 million children in the UK. So let's say 5.5 million girls and 1,740 is 0.03% of that. And considering that around 1% of adults are some kind of transgender, 0.03% of kids is not really an alarming number to me. If anything, you'd expect it to be higher. But part of Joanne's problem here is that she seems not to really understand what being trans is.
The writings of young trans men reveal a group of notably sensitive and clever people. The more of their accounts of gender dysphoria I've read, with their insightful descriptions of anxiety, dissociation, eating disorders, self-harm, and self-hatred, the more I've wondered whether if I'd been born 30 years later, I too might have tried to transition. The allure of escaping womanhood would have been huge. If I had found community and sympathy online that I couldn't find in my immediate environment, I believe I could have been persuaded to turn myself into the son my father had openly said he'd have preferred. Fortunately for me, I found my own sense of otherness and my ambivalence about being a woman reflected in the work of female writers and musicians who reassured me that, in spite of everything a sexist world tries to throw at the female-bodied, it's fine not to feel pink, frilly and compliant inside your own head. It's okay to feel confused, dark, both sexual and non-sexual, unsure of what or who you are.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, and let's start by making a list of things being a transgender man is not having anxiety, having dissociation, having an eating disorder, doing self-harm, doing self-hatred, a viable way to make your sexist father proud, not feeling pink, not feeling frilly, not being compliant, feeling confused, feeling dark, feeling sexual, feeling non-sexual, feeling unsure of who you are. Okay, so you can be a trans man and experience some or even all of these things, but none of these things are what being a trans man is. Wanting to take testosterone to masculinize your body and literally live your life as a man is not the same as the typical struggles other girls go through. Joanne is projecting her own memories of troubled adolescence onto trans men and then saying, oh, clearly they were going through the same things I was, just someone persuaded them to transition. It's a limitation of human empathy that sometimes when we're trying to understand what someone else is feeling, the best we can do is to project our feelings onto them. And sometimes that's a misrepresentation. Sometimes other people are experiencing things that we have never experienced.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely a limitation here. And I kind of pointed this out earlier. It's like, I may not have those feelings. And so I may not be able to truly sympathize with them because I've never had the feeling to be able to compare with or not be really understanding. So like then all I can do is project my own feelings because they're all I have to work with, especially if I don't understand it on an intellectual level. So I guess it's possible to maybe it's possible to intellectualize an emotion enough that I can project what that would feel like so that I can kind of get somewhere. But if not, then all I can do is either A, project my feelings because it's all I have to work with, or B, do it logically because I don't have any other tools. So yeah, probably.
So we have to invent explanations about why they're not behaving the way we think they should. Someone is persuading them to transition. But this fear-mongering about kids being persuaded to transition is just not how things work. From the way transphobes talk about it, you'd think whenever a little girl on the playground picks up a toy truck, an endocrinologist pops out from behind a tree and says, "We've got a nonconformist on our hands, Johnson. Stand by, I'm gonna trans him." But this is the narrative that transphobes are pushing, in particular about young transmasculine people. Last year, a transphobic screed of a book came out that is essentially to transmasculine people what the transsexual empire was to trans women. It's called Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. Chapter 1. The Contagion. Jesus. Laying it on a little thick, don't you think, Abigail? The argument is that female-to-male transgenderism is an infectious social disease, which is literally the argument Hitler made about homosexuality, but okay, great. I think a major problem with media coverage of trans issues is that not enough attention is paid to transphobia against trans men. Like after the JK Rowling story broke, Daniel Radcliffe came out and said, "Transgender women are women." And that's very nice of him, but a huge section of Joanne's essay is about trans men. In fact, she spends more words on trans men than on any other topic, so I think it's worth looking in particular at that. Something I've noticed is transphobia against trans men is not the same as transphobia against trans women. There's a lot of similarities, but they're really two different prejudices, and they come from different psychological places. In the same way that lesbophobia is different from homophobia against gay men. For trans women, I would say the distinctive experience of transphobia is being simultaneously treated as a pornographic female fetish object and as a dangerous male predator. The ultimate sex demon, this kind of incubus succubus who will ravish your wife and trap your husband. Your polygamous commune will be devastated. Whereas I feel like trans masculine people are less vilified, but so infantilized. I guess transphobes view trans men as women, so a lot of misogynistic tropes still apply. So much for transitioning to escape sexism. The story is often that these vulnerable, confused girls can't possibly decide for themselves what to do with their own bodies, so the courts must intervene to take control. Which is exactly what just happened in the UK, where trans youth under 16 will now need not only the approval of a doctor, but will need to seek a court order in order to get puberty blockers.
Which makes total sense, again, because, again, there's an issue of consent there. again, for any medication, for any surgery, the idea of a person under the age of 18 being able to consent to any sort of prescription medication or any kind of surgery is not normally is not normally a concept. We don't believe that people under the age of 18 have the capacity to consent. So yeah, they would not only need the permission of the doctor, because they need permission of themselves, which they can't give because they're literally legally incompetent. Right. So they need not only the consent of the doctor, they need consent of themselves, which they can't give. And that's not just true for this. This is true for like any kind of surgery, any kind of prescription medication. So the UK saying, yeah, they need consent of themselves, which means they need consent of a court or a guardian or whatever, would be completely consistent with how we treat them for like literally everything else. Yeah.
And the justification given for this mirrored exactly Joanne's concerns about fragile, vulnerable teenage girls being unable to make informed decisions. In her essay, Joanne says,
I happen to know a self-described transsexual woman who's older than I am and wonderful. Although she's open about her past as a gay man, I've always found it hard to think of her as anything other than a woman. Being older, though, she went through a long and rigorous process of evaluation, psychotherapy, and staged transformation. The current explosion of trans activism is urging a removal of almost all the robust systems through which candidates for sex reassignment were once required to pass.
So that's what she wants. She wants robust systems of medical gatekeeping, which is the same thing Janice Raymond wants, just Joanne's more polite about it. I want to make a drink. Sometimes people ask me if I used to be a bartender. No, just drank a lot. Ugh, we're revealing leg again. The scandal. Putting a wet white chiffon thing over it is that much more chaste. Well, I'm an extremely chaste woman. I try to honor God with my body. That's why I got a sex change. I'm honoring God with my sex change. I'm not drunk enough for this. So I also want to point out that cis men and cis women are often transphobic for different reasons. A lot of cis men are transphobic against trans women because the thought that a man can become a woman threatens the certainty of their own manhood. It's similar to the reason a lot of straight men are homophobic. They feel their own masculinity is threatened by it. And of course, a lot of straight men...
I definitely don't feel that way. I don't feel my own masculinity is threatened by what anyone else does or feels. Not feeling particularly threatened, no. Yeah.
Are attracted to trans women, and they feel that that attraction threatens their identity as straight men. Back in my comp het days when I dated men, for a couple straight guys...
Chloe Malavec says, medical gatekeeping for underage people. If you're an adult, do what you want. Right, Chloe. That is actually true. Yes, it is absolutely 100% medical gatekeeping for underage people. Right. Correct. We don't believe that underage people have capacity to consent. Right. It is gatekeeping, yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, pressing on.
I hooked up with, going down on me was like crossing the fucking Rubicon. This is it, Mr. Frodo. If I take one more step, I'll be the farthest from heterosexual I've ever been. Okay, Samwise, whatever you need to tell yourself. And afterwards, they go into this whole Cartesian spiral. What have I done? What does this mean? Who am I? I think for a lot of cis women, the very existence of trans men sends them into a similar identity crisis. I think a lot of women have had to fight a really difficult internal battle to make peace with their own womanhood. And for some women, confronting the existence of transgender people seems to open some old wounds. Like I've noticed in particular that some of the most virulent and obsessive TERFs are older lesbian women on the more butch side of things. And these women see hyper-feminine trans women in makeup and dresses, and they say, that is not what being a woman is. I've had to fight for my own identity against the idea that that's what being a woman is. These are just misogynistic stereotypes. You are a parody of womanhood. You're a fetishist. And when they see trans men, they say, you're a traitor. You're a self-loather. Why can't you learn to accept yourself as a woman the way I've had to? But this is all projection and misunderstanding. Trans women do not think that wearing dresses is what makes us women. And trans men do not think that not feeling pink, frilly, and compliant is what makes them men. These are meanings that JK Rowling is assigning to trans people's actions in her own brain because she perceives our lives as some kind of commentary on gender with an implied ideology about what it means to be a man or a woman. But that's your interpretation, Joanne. That's a meaning that you are imposing on us because it seems you have a lot of traumatic gender baggage of your own, and it's interfering with your ability to genuinely empathize with trans people. You know, at the end of your essay...
That might be partially because of what you alluded to earlier. I think you were kind of closer on an earlier point on this one, Natalie. It's literally because they don't have those feelings. So, and we don't understand them enough to project them. So that's probably exactly the problem. Yeah, we don't feel the way that you feel. We don't understand what that means. And maybe it's not possible to understand until you have that feeling. And maybe then you can't really explain a feeling. Maybe that's the problem. But because Joanne or myself, for example, don't have the feeling, we can't truly empathize, right? Because we don't completely understand it. And so then we only really have one of two options. It's like, we have three options, basically. One, we can try to intellectualize it enough so that we can project it. But I'm having problems with that. So I'm having problems with that, and presumably Joanne is too. Or number two, we can put our own feelings that we do have and project those, which doesn't really work. Or three, we can intellectualize it. It's like, what are our other choices here? So yeah, maybe we can't completely empathize because we don't completely understand what it is we're empathizing with, or we don't understand what that means. So, yeah.
You say that you never forget the inner complexity when it comes to trans people. And that's a nice thought, but until you're actually able to stop seeing trans people as some kind of like abstract theory of gender or as a projection of your own adolescence, then you're not really seeing us as distinct individuals with our own experiences and stories. And since you're a self-appointed...
No, it's that it's not my failure to see you as distinct. It's I literally don't understand your stories. I literally don't understand your experiences because I don't have that experience, right? I think this is no less true for anyone. I think everyone probably has this problem, right? It's easier to empathize or sympathize with an experience we've had, even if it's lesser degree, because like then we can at least extend it in our mind and be like, well, we've had a lesser experience with that, so I can somewhat project what it would be like in a scarier experience to some degree, because at least I can extrapolate from some experience I have. But if you've never had that feeling, if you've never had that experience, I mean, you might, I don't think this is any less true for Natalie than it would be for me. It's like, I don't have any experience. I don't have any personal firsthand knowledge. So my ability to sympathize with it is naturally limited. And I don't think there's anyone who doesn't have this limitation. It's like we can understand the experiences we've had with. We don't really know what something's like until you've been there, you know? Or maybe you have someone who's close enough to you, in a close enough relationship to you, and they're having the experiences because you're close enough to them, then you can have a more sympathetic kind of relationship. Because they have it, then you're more able to project. So if you know the person well enough, maybe then you can kind of understand their feelings. But without some context, I think everyone has this problem.
Spokesperson on gender issues. I think it would be good if you listened to the experiences of trans men without, for instance, superimposing your own troubled relationship with your father. I should probably talk about the book, since I did go to the trouble to read all 900 pages, because unlike certain other YouTubers, I do in fact know how to read. Troubled Blood was published in September 2020 by JK Rowling under her pen name Robert Galbraith. You know, for someone apparently so concerned about her womanhood being erased by the transsexuals, the fact that she publishes under a male pen name it's interesting. It's a choice. God, this thing is huge. It's like the infinite jest of turfery. So Troubled Blood is a detective novel about the simmering heterosexual tension between two investigators. And that's really what Rowling does best, isn't it? Simmering. There's a lot of simmering in the Harry Potter universe, and a lot of fans who'd like to raise that simmer to a boil. Hello, Daniel. I love you, grown-up Harry Potter. Let me show you my love, the only way I know how.
Okay, this is a thing that's happening now.
Ah! Ah! Is there going to be discourse about this? Like, if it's wrong to have compat feelings about Daniel Radcliffe, I don't want to be right. I will not be shamed for my shameful fantasies. Get out of here, Daniel. This is the final farewell to my heterosexuality. Goodbye, Daniel! And your little arm, too. You stay out of this, Linda. Meow, 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 meow. So the prime suspect in Troubled Blood is Dennis Creed, a cross-dressing serial killer who dresses as a woman to lull his
What?
victims whom he abducts, tortures, rapes, and murders. Interesting. Now, I enjoyed this book because, like most women, I enjoy books about dangerous perverts. But a lot of trans people, literate trans people, have called this book transphobic. And you might think that's unfair since the character Dennis Creed, this serial killer, he's not a trans. He's a cross-dresser. This has nothing to do with trans people. Why so triggered, snowflake? Well, precious, there's a couple things I think are worth taking into consideration here. One is that the transvestite or transsexual serial killer is an old transphobic trope. It's a cliche that goes back decades. And I take great offense to the suggestion that trans women are serial killers because I, for one, haven't been caught yet. The trope seems to originate in 1960 with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. That's just my guess though, I haven't researched this. Who do you think I am, Lindsay Ellis? So I don't think Psycho is transphobic. Funny. The movie ends with a psychoanalytic summing up where the psychiatrist offers the pseudo-Freudian explanation that Norman cross-dresses because the personality of his dead mother takes over and out of jealousy kills the women Norman is attracted to. Therefore, the psychiatrist explains, Norman is not a real transvestite. You're a fake transvestite, Norman. Trender alert. But I do think that even if Psycho isn't explicitly transphobic, movies can subconsciously implant ideas and feelings into our brains. And I do think it's worth noting that the most famous and most terrifying murder scene in cinema history is of a man in a dress attacking a woman in a bathroom. To quote a popular film critic, you might not have noticed it, but your brain did. The cross-dressing Psycho trope became explicitly transphobic in the campy 1980s Psycho ripoff Dressed to Kill, in which Michael Caine plays a transsexual psychiatrist who, yes, dresses as a woman to kill women he's attracted to.
He was a transsexual.
What?
A transsexual.
You see, there's some men and women, too, who think they're born in the wrong body. They're called transsexuals. And all they want to do is have their sex changed.
It's all they want to do. The transsexuals. Dressed to Kill also ends with a psychiatric summing up, where the doctor explains that Michael Caine is a case of
opposite sexes inhabiting the same body.
But it's the female Michael Caine who kills, because, and I quote,
Elliot's penis became erect, and Bobby took control, trying to kill anyone that made Elliot masculinely sexual.
There's often a misogynistic trope hiding behind the transphobic one. It's the woman in...
Isn't that like just a twist on the femme fatale? I mean, is there something fundamentally different for the transgender, or just working with the femme fatale mystique? I don't know, man. If it was a female serial killer, would we be different about this? Or female who dresses as men? I don't know. Maybe I'm looking too much into it.
The man who does the murders. It's the mother's fault.
His mother was a clinging, demanding woman.
The most mature iteration of this trope, the crown jewel of transphobic movies, is of course The Silence of the Lambs, which is honestly one of my favorite movies because Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins are just radiant in it. And also, I hate myself. Silence of the Lambs is the story of Buffalo Bill, an animal lover and innovative seamstress. Buffalo Bill is a trangender. A trangender! Who kills women to make a suit out of their skin because his application for sex reassignment was rejected because, according to Hannibal Lecter,
Billy is not a real transsexual.
Hannibal Lecter is a true scum. There's so much gatekeeping of trans people. I just want to use this opportunity to reassure my trans audience that even if you've only killed 1 or 2 people, you're valid. I entertain myself. That's how I continue to struggle onwards.
Billy hates his own identity, you see, and he thinks that makes him a transsexual. But his pathology is 1,000 times more savage and more terrifying.
More savage and terrifying than being a transsexual? Is that even possible? Okay, it's definitely getting brighter in here because the sun is rising. Silence of the Lambs differs from its male-gazy predecessors in that it kind of feels like a radical feminist movie. Clarice is a perfect blend of strength and vulnerability, and every man in this movie is a pig, except maybe Hannibal Lecter, the only one who actually respects Clarice, the only real gentleman, with his Goldberg variations and his sketches of the Duomo. Chilton's a pig, the entomologist is a swine, even Crawford's kind of a pig. The pigs are pigs, Miggs is pigs, and Buffalo Bill is the ultimate pig. Die Überschwein. It's in the original German. The fuck am I talking about? And he's obsessed with death's head moths, this demonization of the most self-congratulatory metaphor for gender transformation. I can't believe
Mithrin Emrys says, ContraPoints is an interesting character. Her wit is so dry. Sometimes tough to tell when she's making a genuine point, when she's being fatuous. Fair. As a person who also loves the dry humor and also loves using humor where it's deliberately designed to be unclear if it's joking, because I think that's most interesting, personally. So as a person who uses the same humor, I appreciate it. And maybe I can't tell the difference either sometimes. So maybe she's better at it than me. But yeah, I do like the dry humor, and I do like telling the telling the joke seriously and hope the absurdity of it conveys the meaning. So I'm trusting that people will understand the absurdity of it to understand that's not real. So maybe we both have the same problem on that one, because sometimes people take us seriously even though we're not meant to be. But yeah, fair enough, Mithrin. That's very good.
I finally emerged as a beautiful butterfly. Show don't tell, Lily. Oh my god, I can't wait till trans people have so many rights that it's okay to make fun of us. There's a lot to work with. So Silence of the Lambs is a good movie. I'm not saying it's inherently wrong to make a movie or write a book about a transgender serial killer, but there is an issue of representation. You know, for decades, there was close to zero good representation of trans people in movies or TV, but a whole host of cross-dressing serial killers, and that has an effect on the way people think. When it comes time to debate bathroom bills, and people are subconsciously remembering Psycho, that has serious consequences for trans people. It's getting so bright in here. The sun has risen. And it's also not psychologically good for us to grow up only seeing monstrous caricatures of ourselves in media. Like, even as late as my early 20s, I didn't know any trans people, but I'd seen these transgender horror movies. I think the most positive approximation of representation I knew about was like Frankenfurter and Divine. And both of them are also psychotic murderers, just, you know, in a fun way. Should've just gotten her those cha-cha heels. So I knew back then I was some kind of a trans, but I guess I felt that it was basically the moral equivalent of being a serial killer. Not something you tell other people about, that's for sure. And things have changed in the last 10 years. I mean, it's a different world for trans people than it was. And there's trans people now who are 10 years younger than me who don't even hate themselves. Can't relate. So this takes us back to 2020 and Troubled Blood. Joanne has written a book about a serial killer who dresses as a woman to kill women. groundbreaking. Now, this is such a cliche that you'd kind of expect a seasoned writer like JK Rowling to subvert it somehow. Give us a remix, turn it on its head, humanize the monster in an unexpected way. You know, give her a little Half-Blood Prince moment, or at least do something new with it. But she really doesn't. It's just Buffalo Bill all over again. I guess I should read you some passages. I'm reading it on my phone. I'm not bringing the book out and pretending to read on the book. You can see from my little bookmarks that I read the physical book. Yes, I'm a YouTuber, and yes, I read a book. So here's the psychiatrist. There's always a psychiatrist, isn't there? Here's the psychiatrist's diagnosis of Dennis Creed.
He's a classic sociopath, you see. A pure example of the type. He scores very highly on the dark triad. Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Devious, sadistic, and
Okay, so yeah, we have to correct the fatuous, facetious thing. Okay, because this is interesting because this comes to two words that have similar meanings and also have similar definitions and substituting one for the other. So where did this come up most recently in my videos where I corrected someone on this? What was the word they used? And I corrected them. Oh, peaked. When you pique your interest, right? So they said P-E-A-K. And I'm like, no, it's P-I-Q-E-D, peaked. But they have they have the same pronunciation. They're spelled very differently, and they have very similar definitions. So I corrected someone on the peaked versus peaked thing. So I was taking a look at this to figure out where I made this mistake. So facetious means something you don't take seriously, and fatuous means dumb. So, yeah. So, yeah, two words that are spelled similarly, two words that have similar definitions, but they're pronounced, yeah. So that was my bad on the facetious, fatuous thing. It's facetious, not fatuous. Fatuous is a different word. My bad. Let's press on.
And extremely egotistical.
You see, he's what we in the medical profession call the baddie. Quoth Dennis.
It excited me to watch a woman who didn't know she was being observed. I'd do it to my sisters, but I'd creep up to lit windows as well. If I got lucky, I'd see women or girls undressing, adjusting themselves, or even a glimpse of nudity. I was aroused not only by the obviously sensual aspects, but by the sense of power. I felt I stole something of their essence from them, taking that which they had thought private and hidden.
He soon progressed to stealing women's underwear from neighbours' washing lines and even from his grandmother, Ina. These he enjoyed wearing in secret and masturbating in.
Remember when she wrote books about wizard school? Ho, dear readers. So Dennis Creed is characterized as a narcissistic male fetishist who preys on women. And okay, there really are men who fetishize women's clothes, for example. I mean, Freud talked about this, right? Partialism, where sexuality focuses on a body part or an article of clothing. And Freud theorized that fetishes emerge from the unconscious trauma that occurs when men discover that women don't have a penis. Boy, have I got news for Dr. Freud. But considering that Joanne has been doing a lot of gender-critical reading over the past few years, it's kind of hard for me to ignore that narcissistic male fetishist who preys on women is exactly the way a lot of TERFs characterize trans women. Remember,
do they though?
The whole gender-critical feminists with concerns about trans youth routine is obfuscation. These people are bigots. And it's a pretty common canard among TERFs that trans women are hypersexual and hyper-aggressive, right? These inherently pornographic sex demons. But can't we just have a reasonable debate about this? Are trans women sex demons? Why, yes. Yes, we are. The bigots are simply correct. We're sex demons. You can't even talk to these people. How do you engage with this level of vilification? I used to take the bait and argue that no, actually, I'm not a sex demon. unless you want me to be. But it's counterproductive to make that argument. Why? Because my not involved in human trafficking t-shirt has people asking a lot of questions already answered by my shirt. So I have a hard time believing that the character Dennis Creed has nothing to do with Joanne's beliefs about trans people. And I also want to note that Dennis's cross-dressing is described not just as part of the sexual satisfaction he gains from invading women's privacy and invading women's bodies, but also as a deliberate strategy of deception. Dennis says on page 854, so you know I actually read this fucking shit.
In a wig, bit of lipstick. They think you're harmless, odd, maybe queer. You're the nice man who's safe.
And earlier he's described as...
Dennis Creed had been a meticulous planner, a genius of misdirection in his neat little white van, dressed in the pink coat he had stolen from Vi Cooper and sometimes wearing a wig that, from a distance, to a drunk victim, gave his hazy form a feminine appearance just long enough for his large hands to close over a gasping mouth.
So this character, sprung from Joanne's imagination, cross-dresses as a way to disarm his victims. They mistake him for a woman, or as, you know, and that causes them to lower their guard. And this reminds me of one of Maya Forstatter's allegedly transphobic tweets.
Pronouns are rehypnol. Important article by Hairy Legged Harpy.
Rehypnol.
Vulvamort.
Wow, that's an interesting way of describing it. Pronouns are rehypnol. Wow. Okay. I wouldn't go quite that far, man. Jeez.
She who must not be named, followed by JK Rowling. Because, of course,
pronouns are rohypnol.
Rohypnol is roofies, and there's a picture of a pill with she on it.
Pronouns are like rohypnol. They dull your defenses. They change your inhibitions. They're meant to. You've had a lifetime's experience learning to be alert to him and to relax to her. For good reason. These instinctive responses keep you safe. It's not even a conscious thing. It's like the hairs standing on end. Your subconscious brain is helping you not get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger that your eyes haven't noticed yet. I want to be alert. I want others to be alert. I want people to see the real picture, and I want those instinctive reactions that we feel when something is wrong to be unblunted, undulled by this cheap but effective psychological trick. I feel like I owe this to myself, and I absolutely owe it to other women. And more than anything, I owe this to girls. I don't want to play even the tiniest part in grooming them to disregard their natural protective instincts. Those instincts are there for a reason, to keep them safe. They need those instincts intact and sharp. And that's why I won't use preferred pronouns. Using rohypnol on others isn't a courtesy.
Okay, yeah, that's a lot. There's some ideas in there that I agree with, but the way this is expressed is a little much. It's a little much. Maybe tone it down a couple degrees. It's like sounds a little unhinged. You know, maybe you gotta tone this down a couple steps because it's like, yeah, there's something in there, but wow, that's a lot. Mithrian Emrys says, NGL, kind of disappointed with Contra here. Her older videos had better, more nuanced arguments. Right now, I'm hearing a lot of straw man, and you disagree, ergo bigot. I kind of agree with that. But what was really interesting and why I kind of decided to do this, well, I kind of decided to do it for a couple reasons. One is because it's a subject on which I want to think about. Because I think I could be wrong. And I want to challenge my own beliefs and preconceptions. So, and ContraPoints usually has some pretty good arguments and some pretty good ideas. And challenging myself and challenging my beliefs is usually pretty good. So I listened to this and I'm like, okay, here's some good points and here's some bad points. But I definitely hear you disagree. I'm not so sure about the straw man thing personally. I'm not sure if it's straw manning, but I definitely hear the if you disagree, you're a bigot kind of comment. I'll agree with that. There's a lot of if you disagree, you're a bigot. It must be canards. It must be bigotry. It must be soft bigotry. It must be these things. Yeah, I'll agree with that much. So I'm not so sure about the straw manning thing, but the everyone who disagrees with me is a bigot thing is coming out a lot more in the comments for sure. So we still have 26 minutes left of this thing. So, you know, let's press on some more.
Okay. So, these are the thoughts of someone who's been hurt. Speaking of which, let's return now to the other reason that JK Rowling feels her interest in trans people is intensely personal.
Christine is a math nerd. Do you now think you're wrong at all? I think I understand at least partially where Natalie's coming from. I wouldn't say completely, because we talked about this before, right? Because I don't have those feelings. I don't have anyone particularly close to me that I can relate to in a way that to try to borrow their feelings, because I understand them. I'm around them, so I can understand it on a more sympathetic, or literally the word sympathetic in this case, literally sympathetic idea. But I think I understand at least partially where Natalie is coming from. That being said, I think the intellectual debate is still warranted. I think questions like what is a woman is valid. Is sex the same thing as gender is valid. What are the qualities of womanhood? What are the qualities of female? How do you know you feel like a woman? I think those are valid questions. And I suppose those could be perceived as gatekeeping questions, but if there's no gate, then the term is meaningless, right? That's the problem. There has to be gatekeeping, because otherwise the term is meaningless. If the term trans has no gates, then it's infinitely elastic. And if it's infinitely elastic, then it doesn't mean anything. In a very literal sense, it doesn't mean anything. So it has to have limits. If it has no limits, the term is literally meaningless. It provides no clarity, because if it has no gates, then definitionally I would be trans, because it has no gates. Therefore, I must be trans, because it has no limits. So the term is meaningless. So it has to have, yeah. So there's things in here I definitely disagree with. Like, I'm not gatekeeping you. I'm like, don't you kind of have to for the term to have some meaning? It's like the term is infinitely elastic, then it includes everyone, and then it doesn't help. So yeah, I think some of these, and then especially from a legal perspective, when we're thinking about modifying policy and modifying law, understanding what these terms are and what they mean and what the limitations are or not seems perfectly valid, because like, what exactly are we talking about when we say trans men are men or something? What exactly do we mean? What does that include? What does that exclude? What are the limitations of that? If there are no limitations, then does it even make sense to talk about it? So I kind of disagree that the intellectual argument is invalid. I also disagree that the TERFs are just wolves in sheep clothing. They don't really believe that. They're just putting on the mantle of feminism to color their bigotry in more acceptable clothing. I don't think that's true. I think the TERFs think that feminine means something different from masculine. It has a definition different than masculine, and it has to be gatekeeped to have any meaning. It must mean something distinct. So I don't think that they're merely pretending to believe something they don't. So, but I understand in part where it's coming from. I just don't completely understand what exactly we're talking about. But it's worthy to be pondered and considered. It has ranges, not perfectly discrete limits. Well, not to put too fine a point on it, defending the straw man, but a range still has discrete limits, namely the end of the range. Right? So, in fact, yeah, not only do ranges have discrete limits, they have two of them to be exact. They have an upper bound and a lower bound. So, yeah, I'm not sure that I disagree that because they're ranges, they're not limits. I'm like, yes, there are. There are two of them. There's an upper limit and a lower limit. They can only go this far and go this far, and then you're beyond the pale. It's like, yeah. No, no.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow, 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 meow. Meow, 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 meow. I was born this way. Born as a fucking idiot. I made a gin martini because I'm 200 years old. It's kind of an
Hey, I love gin martinis. I'm not gonna lie, they're one of my favorite drinks. Now that's a little dark, so I'm guessing it's a dirty martini. But gin martinis are fucking fantastic. It's one of my favorite drinks in the world. Yeah, great.
that drink. Well, I'm a 200-year-old witch. That's the plot. Pay attention. It makes sense. Also, a martini. What is a martini? But an excuse to drink a glass of gin. Should probably eat an olive, or this is gonna go straight to my brain. Okay, we have to be serious now. In Turf Wars, Joanne writes,
I've been in the public eye now for over 20 years, and I have never talked publicly about being a domestic abuse and sexual assault survivor. On Saturday morning, I read that the Scottish Government is proceeding with its controversial gender recognition plans, which will, in effect, mean that all a man needs to do to become a woman is to say he's one. To use a very contemporary word, I was triggered, ground down by the relentless attacks from trans activists on social media. I spent much of Saturday in a very dark place inside my head as memories of a serious sexual assault I suffered in my 20s recurred on a loop. I couldn't shut out those memories, and I was finding it hard to contain my anger and disappointment about the way I believe my government is playing fast and loose with women's and girls' safety.
Okay, so for Joanne, her traumatic experience being attacked by a man is psychologically related to her concerns about the legal recognition of trans people and about trans people saying nasty things about her on Twitter. She feels intensely about this issue because the discourse around it literally triggers her PTSD. In her own words,
the scars left by violence and sexual assault don't disappear, no matter how loved you are and no matter how much money you've made. My perennial jumpiness is a family joke, and even I know it's funny, but I pray my daughters never have the same reasons I do for hating sudden loud noises or finding people behind me when I haven't heard them approaching.
A common symptom of trauma is hypervigilance, a constant alertness to danger. This is described in a very wise book called Conflict is Not Abuse by Sarah Schulman.
The traumatized person's sense of their ability to protect themselves has been damaged or destroyed. They feel endangered even if there is no actual danger in the present, because in the past, they have experienced profoundly invasive cruelty and they know it is possible.
I want to respect that having a trauma trigger response is a real experience of suffering that is not the victim's fault, even in cases where that response is irrational or politically incorrect. For example, if you got mugged by a black teenager, I wouldn't judge you if you felt a little jumpy around black teenagers for a while. However, if that jumpiness motivates you to become a campaigner for more militant policing of black neighborhoods, then you are participating in anti-black racism, and that I will criticize, regardless of your trauma. I hope it goes without saying that trans people gaining easier access to legal recognition in Scotland in 2020 is completely unrelated to Joanne Rowling being assaulted by a cis man in the 1990s. This is a non sequitur. So it's a little odd to me that while Joanne is self-aware enough to recognize that her hypervigilance is the result of trauma, and she's self-aware enough to realize that her hypervigilance is often irrational to the point where she herself finds humor in it, she's somehow not self-aware enough to realize that her fears about trans people are an irrational manifestation of that hypervigilance. And again, it's not that I'm unsympathetic to her trauma, and I would be nothing but sympathetic if her feelings about this amounted to simply being triggered by, for example, perceiving someone as male in the women's bathroom, which is something most trans women are sensitive to. Like, I've spoken to trans women who are worried they don't pass or who know they don't pass, and who do everything they can to avoid using a public bathroom because they don't want to make cis women uncomfortable. So these trans women go through life every day compromising their own comfort and safety to protect cis women's feelings of comfort and safety. But Joanne's transphobia has so outgrown the scope of an automatic trigger response. It's become a fixation for years, to the point where she's written a 900-page novel about a serial killer who cross-dresses to trick women into being less vigilant. And now, the primary political cause she's decided to use her superstardom to champion is opposition to trans liberation. And past trauma is just not an excuse for that.
No, see, though, I disagree with that completely. No, I don't, because it depends a lot what we mean by trans liberation. But yeah, she's not, at least overtly, and you're reading into it. That's not fair. I mean, I think you should deal with what people say on their own terms. You know, I don't really like the idea of hunting for dog whistles, and which seems to be a lot of what ContraPoints is saying, that these people are really dog whistling. And it's like, maybe they just mean what they're saying, and you should just take what they're saying at face value. Is JK Rowling saying opposing any liberation? You're interpreting a lot. You're reading a lot into this, man. You're saying that JK Rowling is really, by saying that sex is real, which is valid if somewhat ineloquently expressed, as we discussed earlier. So maybe it's ineloquently expressed, but it's a valid point of view. And you're taking all that and being like, well, if she thinks that, it must mean this. If she believes that, it must mean this, and so forth and so on. So it must mean that she's opposing liberation, which is, again, is like, exactly what are we talking about? Liberating who from what, under what circumstances, and so forth and so on. And it's like, well, that's the discussion we should be having. I'm like, well, it's also, maybe that's the discussion we can have too. But I think it's equally valid, and perhaps even more valid, to have the discussion higher up the chain. Because there's some predicate things that we're disagreeing on, and going to the end of the discussion is somewhat putting that up past. And so you're saying that this is calling for oppression or calling for lack of liberation, when JK Rowling, by her own terms, is not doing anything. You're reading a lot into this, man. You're reading a lot into this. And it would be the same, or at least be comparable, and people on the right do this, to be fair. But when people on the left say certain things, is be like, well, what they really mean. It's like, and you'll definitely find people who will say those overt things too, to some degree, but it's like, maybe you should just take it on its own terms and deal with that, and not read too much into it. When you're the one hearing dog whistles, it's like, that's too much.
Like, if you're against gay marriage because you were traumatized as a child when your father left your mother for a man, you're still a homophobe, right? You're not less of a bigot because your bigotry has a tragic backstory. In fact, bigotry often has a tragic backstory. Bigotry involves feelings of being threatened or attacked, so it's often rooted in trauma. After the collective trauma of 9/11, Americans felt threatened, not just by Al-Qaeda, but by the entire religion of Islam. And this was used, and is still being used, to justify wars, discrimination, travel bans, hate crimes. Feelings of victimization are often used as a justification for aggression. And when the target of that aggression is a marginalized group, the result is bigotry. Now, what TERFs say is that it's actually the trans activists who are the real aggressors, who are the real bigots. Trans women are men. They're agents of the patriarchy, creepy perverts demanding access to female spaces. TERF is a misogynistic slur designed to silence women. It's biological women who are the real victims. The real victim. So often in debates on social issues, we're faced with two opposing sides, both claiming to be the victim. And we're often told to believe victims, believe marginalized people. Well, if only it was that easy. So often, the exact point in question is, who is the victim? And who's the oppressor? That book I quoted earlier, Conflict is Not Abuse, describes the way the overstatement of harm is used as a justification for cruelty in situations ranging from romantic...
Oh man, I mean, come on. If we're going to talk about the overstatement of harm, I mean, come on, ContraPoints. Come on. Don't you think that you maybe are overstating the harm that Rowling is actually what she's saying by her own terms? Maybe that's just... Yeah, don't you think there's a little introspection point there to be had? Yeah, all right.
Romantic relationships to international...
Rowan Hollingsworth says, for someone who's against reading dog whistles and stuff, you sure are interpolating what Natalie's saying. Am I? I mean, I'm trying not to, but I'm trying to. Maybe I am. It's possible. I'm trying to understand it and deal with it and try to address what it is as best as I can. But maybe I'm doing the same thing. I mean, I'm a human being, and so I'm not necessarily free of the biases that I'm seeing of others. You know, I'm a human being capable of the same biases, so maybe I am. Maybe I'm misreading what she's saying, just as she's misreading what JK is saying. You know, so it's part of the human condition. I've tried to be as fair as I can be, but it doesn't mean that I'm perfect, and it doesn't mean that I'm doing it well, and it doesn't mean that you can't find flaws in what I've said, you know, and it doesn't mean that you weren't flawed either, right? So it's like, but we're all, I'm trying my best here. I'm trying my best. And so if you think I'm making some mistake, then let me know, but I'm certainly trying here, you know, as best as I can.
Affairs.
Bullies often conceptualize themselves as being under attack when they are the ones originating the pain.
Throughout Joanne's essay, she frequently represents herself as taking a defiant, free speechy stand against
accusations and threats from trans activists. The trans activists who...
When your suggestion there's a proper or better level of abstraction up the Lavaca St, is that a value judgment on your part? I don't know if it's a valid judgment. I don't know if it's a value judgment. It's just, I think that you should have, maybe it is a value judgment, but it's contention that we should have the part of the argument that we're actually disagreeing at. And if we're having the argument at the end of the chain, that might not be the most productive place to have the argument, because where we really disagreed was a couple levels above. Now, that might not be true. Maybe we really are having a disagreement at the end of the chain, in which case it would be the valid place for the argument. But it's like trying to find out where the disagreement really is, and having the discussion at the right level. So you could go too high up, you could go too low. You know, and maybe the end of the chain is the right place. Maybe it's not. But it's I guess, I don't know if it's a value judgment as much as it's a contention of we should actually have the debate where we're really having the debate. If we're having the debate way down at the end of the policy level, but we really disagree a couple levels up, then it's just going to be endlessly frustrating because we're not talking about what we really disagree about, which is a couple levels. So I don't know if that's a value judgment. It's not much, but it's like trying to find the right place to have the argument seems like the most productive thing. Yeah. Rowan says, balance isn't always fairness. You're looking for both sides of my point in Allie's Discord. I'm trying, man. I'm trying.
Declare that TERFs need punching and re-educating. Huge numbers of women are justifiably terrified by the trans activists.
And in her subsequent tweets, she frames herself as the victim of a witch hunt.
Sometimes a t-shirt just speaks to you.
This witch doesn't burn. This is the new Salem. Women are being attacked online for taking a stand against the transsexuals. This witch doesn't burn. Let's see what else we have for sale at wildwomenworkshop.com. Fuck your pronouns. Trans men are my sisters. Sorry about your dick, bro. That's a good one. I'd wear that. Don't call me sis. Cis is a vile slur against my tender normality. Must be really hard for you, not being a tranny. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Trans women are women. God, the sense of persecution. This is Orwell's nightmare. This is how Nazi Germany started. First, Hitler told the transgenders they were super hecking valid uwu. Then he burned their books out. Wait, oh no. That's actually the opposite of what happened. Slurs. Feminist t-shirt. Nice trilby. It's very dapper. Slurs. Man-hater, feminazi, prude, witch, bigot. Wait, bigot? Are we reclaiming bigot now? Is bigot a slur used to silence the females? Joanne wrote in her essay that she was standing up in solidarity with
women who have histories like mine, who've been slurred as bigots for having concerns around single-sex spaces.
Slurred as bigots. There's something so revealing about the claim that bigot is a slur, because so much of indirect bigotry is an attempt to reverse the roles of victim.
Is bigotry a slur? Well, it's certainly a way to dismiss somebody and dismiss their point without actually attacking the point. So it's a way to dismiss everything that they say because they're bigoted, so we don't have to take them seriously. So I don't know if it's a slur exactly, but it is a way to completely dismiss someone without actually having to address whatever point they have. Because it's like same thing as like calling a person a racist. If they're racist, then you don't have to take them seriously. You can just dismiss them. Put them in a box and shove them off the Overton window. And bigotry is the same thing. So I don't know if exactly it's a slur as a way to dismiss somebody without really contending with their argument, really contending with what they're saying. So it's a vexatious label, something like that.
An aggressor. Isn't calling people bigots the real bigotry? It's good. It's very clever. A white racist will hardly ever use the phrase white supremacy. No, they say white genocide, always on the defensive. And now transphobes are bemoaning lesbian extinction. The same conservative media who 10 years ago were portraying lesbians as like angry, mannish have now created this mythology of lesbians as these virginal damsels in distress who are threatened with invasion and now extinction. On one front, by the dark cabal of endocrinologists who are somehow coercing them into becoming men. Elliot, no, you can't possibly be doing this because you're 33 years old and capable of autonomous thought. Clearly, you are tricked by the transgender lesbian extinction agenda. And on the other front, by trans women who, we're told, are slurring as bigots. Lesbians who won't sleep with them. Joanne claims that
none of the gender-critical women I've talked to hates trans people. On the contrary, many of them become interested in this issue in the first place out of concern for trans youth, and they're hugely sympathetic towards trans adults who simply want to live their lives.
But the only gender-critical women she mentions by name are Maya Forstater, who I would not describe as hugely sympathetic to trans adults, and Magdalene Burns, about whom Joanne says,
Magdalene was an immensely brave young feminist and lesbian. Magdalene was a great believer in the importance of biological sex and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women with penises.
Okay, so I agree it would be awful to call someone a bigot just because they don't want to date a woman with a penis. But are you sure that's why people call Magdalene Burns a bigot? Are you sure she hasn't said anything else about trans women that might lead people to think she's less than hugely sympathetic?
You are fucking blackface actors. You aren't women. You're men who get sexual kicks from being treated like women. Fuck you and your dirty fucking perversions. Our oppression isn't a fetish. You pathetic, sick fuck.
Hugely sympathetic. Hugely sympathetic.
Because Joanne claims that TERFs are hugely sympathetic to trans people and just don't want to be called bigots, and because she constantly frames herself as the victim of terrifying trans activists who say mean things online, I think it's fair for me to mention that this, right here, is how I'm used to being spoken to and spoken about by TERFs. When you're a trans woman online, TERFs pin you to the vivisection table. They dead name and misgender you, they mock your genitals, they describe your surgery results as necrotic mutilated wounds, they interpret your every feeling and experience as the manifestation of a sick, woman-hating fetish. You know, in an unrelated video last year, I mentioned being sexually assaulted by a man, and I've since been told by TERFs, essentially, trans-identified males get sexual kicks from being treated like women. Nathan probably enjoyed his so-called rape.
Yeah, no, I think okay. So there's a lot here that's deeply problematic, and I'm not going to defend this stuff because that's there's stuff here that's like to describe it as merely a sexual fetish. No, that can't be right. That doesn't even make sense. And describe it as like saying if someone would enjoy the rape, it's like, no, I mean, no, no. So there's a lot here that's very, very bad, and what they're quoting. That being said, however, I've got a very strong feeling that much less extreme versions of this, such as, for example, what JK Rowling has written, right, is being treated in the same vein as this more extreme stuff. I mean, you are kind of mentioning them in the same breath in some ways. So, yeah. Did J.K. Rowling write anything like this? Not really. But you're describing her as a bigot and describing this person as a bigot. You seem to be treating them somewhat comparably. And, yeah. So, it doesn't apparently take this more extreme stuff to be labeled on the wrong side of the issue. Merely, or I guess you're suggesting that what J.K. Rowling was really saying was this stuff, when no, that doesn't seem fair. No.
I don't even need to say that the idea that trans women can't be raped because we'll just enjoy it is a violently anti-feminist thought. And it's a thought that could only be believed, and believed in the name of feminism no less, by people who have spent days and weeks absorbing the dehumanizing propaganda that turf forums exist to promote. Now, I think if Joanne Rowling was in the room with me right now, she'd say, "I'm so sorry you've been treated that way, but I too have been cruelly victimized online by the trans activists." And you know what? I'm sure that's true. When I listen to Joanne talk about being victimized by trans Twitter, it's easy for me to sympathize, because trans Twitter has treated me the same way. The vilification, the obsession.
Yeah, this is even more the point, right? So it's like, Natalie is completely correct here, but she doesn't seem to completely realize how correct she is. Because, trans Twitter treated you horribly because you had the audacity. What was it? I even forget what the issue was. There was like a 10-second clip in one video where she recited from somebody, Buck somebody, I think, who had some wrong views about True Scum and all the rest of it. And because of this one passing mention of this one person, well, Natalie Wynn has mentioned this one person or quoted from this one person, therefore thinks exactly the same way they do. That person is trans scum, therefore you're trans scum, therefore bigot. Yeah, and so, it's like, exactly so. So, again, see the levels of conflation, or the levels of at least treating, or at least how these terms are used. Like, we had these really extreme statements, which I will say, even for me, go beyond the pale. Right, so we can say that's bigoted, but then we conflate that with what JK said, which has been conflated with what you said. So anyone who's not lockstep in the most liberated version of this is the enemy. And you know that from your own experience. And it's like, I know from my own experience how trans Twitter can be. If you don't completely agree with them, you're the enemy. Even what I said, this one quote from this one guy who has some problematic beliefs, which was a 10-second aside in like an hour-long video, because I mentioned this one person, this Buck Angel, I believe is the guy's name, Buck Angel. I don't even remember what's controversial about him, but he's True Scum or something. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But because I mentioned this one thing, trans Twitter went after me, and that was illegitimate, because I'm on your side. It's like, you're right, you just don't understand how right you are. So, yeah. Okay, yeah.
The fantasies of violence. It's a pretty common occurrence for me to look at my mentions and see people with trans flag avatars posting things like,
"Point of view. You are True Scum and Yushi is gonna beat you to death with a golf club."
#YesAllGamers. Here's a thread where first they call me an anti-Semite because 3 years ago I made a joke about reptilian overlords, and then they get mad because I said I wanted to understand non-binary people instead of just dogmatically believing things, and they conclude,
"So Basically, fuck ContraPoints. I would have bashed her over the goddamn head with a metal bat over and over again.
So this is the level of antipathy that I attract from trans Twitter. So when Joanne says she's been overwhelmed by abusive messages, I'm inclined to believe her. I'm sure her mentions are overwhelmed with anime avatars saying things like,
JK Rowling is hypocritical trash who literally wants millions of trans kids dead.
Harry Potter was always neoliberal garbage and we should have seen this coming.
This dumb bitch doesn't deserve our empathy. She deserves a backhand slap to the face.
And tweets like that are abusive. It's not okay. And I don't make any excuses for it. I want to make a dark and stormy. Sorry, I'll be right back.
Ooh, dark and stormy. I haven't had one of those in a long time.
It's good. So I also think that there really is an element of misogyny to them. I had to put the drink down. It's making me laugh. You cannot talk about misogynistic cyberbullying while holding a tropical drink. It's just not possible to do with a straight face. So I agree, there really is an element of misogyny to this. Misogyny is the most universal prejudice, and trans people are not immune. Angry Twitter mobs are generally more vicious to women, regardless of whether their anger is justified. There is a witch hunt impulse that's still alive in our culture. To be a famous woman is to constantly have every part of your body and soul subject to endless critique. You know, if you're 1 pound overweight, they call you a fatty. If you're 1 pound underweight, they say you have an eating disorder. And if you're exactly the right weight, they call you a fatty with an eating disorder. You know, it's a kind of crowdsourced abuse. There's a reason Taylor Swift is obsessed with her haters. When you're a famous woman, it's hard not to be obsessed with your haters because the haters bring the obsession to you. But it's important to remember that haters are not the same as bigots. Being mean or rude or even abusive is not bigotry unless it's tied to a history of oppression or a backlash against a movement of equality. So no, Mike Huckabee, homophobic is not a slur. And no, David Silverman, the word racist is not like the N-word. And no, Joanne Rowling, bigot is not a slur. TERF is not a slur. And being canceled on Twitter may be a form of abuse, but it's not a form of oppression. And I say this as someone at this point most known for complaining about cancel culture. Oh God, is this my legacy? A lot of trans people have been very mean, verbally abusive even, to JK Rowling. But most people criticizing Joanne, or criticizing me for that matter, might be hurt and angry, but they're not violent. But when you're receiving hundreds or thousands of messages full of hurt and anger and hate, you experience it as one huge tidal wave of loathing crashing over you all at once. And that 0.1% of messages that really are violent, they become emblematic of the way the whole experience feels. And if you've been the victim of abuse before, the experience can be pretty triggering. So it's just not always as simple as the victim and the abuser. Sometimes victims are also abusers. Sometimes abusers have a history of victimization. Sometimes righteously angry people cross a line into abusive excess. And not all abuse comes from a position of power. Why are so many trans people on Twitter so easily driven to extremes of rage and aggression? Well, there's a passage in Conflict is Not Abuse that I think applies just as well to trans Twitter as it does to TERFs.
People living in unrecovered trauma often behave in very similar ways to the people who traumatize them. Over and over, I have seen traumatized people refuse to hear or engage information that would alter their self-concepts, even in ways that could bring them more happiness and integrity. The undiscovered traumatized person's refusal is rooted in a panic that their fragile self cannot bear interrogation, that whatever is keeping them together is not flexible. Perhaps because supremacy in some produces trauma in others, they can become mirror images. And of course, many perpetrators were or are victims themselves.
A lot of TERFs have been treated very horribly by men, and they misdirect some reflection of that abuse at trans people, a vulnerable group who they can mostly get away with hurting. Unlike standing up to powerful men, right, which would be dangerous and difficult. And a lot of trans people have been very horribly treated by men, by TERFs, by strangers on the street, by their own families. And for some of those trans people, Canceling celebrities on Twitter is the one kind of power they have. Plus, a lot of extremely online trans people really don't have a strong sense of conviction and their own identity, which is why they need constant external validation to prop them up. They need to constantly be told that they're valid, that they really are the gender that they say they are. And if someone even obliquely threatens or questions their fragile self-concept, they lash out, Twitter being their only weapon. You know, Joanne, you say at the end of your essay that all you're asking, all you want, is empathy and understanding. And I've tried to extend that to you in this video. But trans people also deserve more empathy and understanding than you've given them. Sometime you should look at some of these Twitter accounts that are always raging against you and raging against me for that matter. In between the raging, look at what they're doing. They're begging for money to pay for healthcare, begging for money to pay for housing. You are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, Joanne, or pounds, or gringotts, or whatever you people have. And trans people are out here literally begging for healthcare. They're begging, Joanne. How powerful could the trans agenda really be? Joanne, you have so much power and influence, many, many times more than what I have. And I have much more power and influence than most trans people. You know, I am in a very different situation than most trans people. I have a lot of other things going for me in this world, but a lot of them have nothing. They have nothing, Joanne. And I think you should take that into consideration next time you decide to speak out about how trans activists are oppressing you. Get it together, Gorge. Are you listening to yourself? What are you doing, Joanne? You know, a lot of trans people have gone through life being rejected and humiliated and excluded over and over again. So they're traumatized. They're easily triggered by anything that reminds them of past betrayal and abandonment, which is something I think you could empathize with. Joanne, you are famous for writing a book about a neglected and abused boy who lives in a closet until he's whisked away to a magical world where he and his freaky friends find acceptance in each other.
I remember when I first met you all. Biggest bunch of misfits I ever set eyes on.
We're still a bunch of misfits.
Well, maybe, but we've all got each other.
So many trans people have found comfort in this story and an escape from a world that doesn't offer a lot of comfort to trans people. So for you to use your fame and influence to rally the backlash against trans acceptance, it feels like a betrayal to a lot of people. And I don't blame them for feeling that way. I feel it too. So Joanne, Joe, Mother, I'm sorry about the Twitter mob. I know how much that sucks. So if you ever want to take me up on it, I'll buy you a drink to apologize for that. But otherwise, I think we're done here. As a trans person, I like to believe in the power of human metamorphosis. But I realize that at this point, you're being constantly love-bombed by transphobes and constantly trashed by trans people, so it would be pretty difficult to change tracks at this point. You'd be 1 in a million if you pulled that off, and I don't know, Joanne, maybe you are 1 in a million. I mean, you wrote The Prisoner of Azkaban, and that shit got me through 5th grade, so who knows? Maybe you have another miracle in you. But I'm too old to believe in magic now, so I'm not gonna sit around waiting for a letter to Hogwarts. Okay. I guess that's it. Mischief managed.
Okay. Very good. So, yeah. So I think I'll conclude kind of where I started on this. So the point of this exercise was to, because I had seen JK's comments, obviously, and I'd seen the criticism, and I thought that was kind of illegitimate. And the point of this exercise was to listen to a counter argument and consider it and respond to it, and where I agreed and where I disagreed, and to think through my own conceptions of things. And we learned some things that were challenging and some things that were worthy of consideration. But I think in large part, maybe I moved slightly, but I still kind of where I am, because it's a little bit difficult when you say to someone who's trying to approach this in an intellectual way, because first of all, law has to be, law can be, justice is zealous but not passionate, is a phrase I always like. Justice is zealous, not passionate. And so we have to consider these issues, especially from a legal perspective, on their implications about what these terms mean and not. And that's no different for any other position of law. And what exactly we're talking about. And trying to understand the philosophical roots of this is helpful to that understanding. So I didn't very much appreciate being dismissed for trying to think about this stuff and trying to intellectualize it. And although my attempt, as though my attempts to intellectualize this and understand it intellectually are soft bigotry, or really a cover for more deep-seated bigotry, I didn't really much appreciate that suggestion. I also didn't really appreciate the conflagration of JK's arguments by her own terms with much more extreme, much more problematic comments from other people. And I didn't really like that conception. I also didn't like the idea that Natalie wasn't able to see how her being trashed by the mob because of her wrong think is somewhat equivalent to what JK has somewhat experienced, and also conflating with what she's saying with what she really meant to say or whatever. So there was some conflation. I don't know that I think it's straw manning. Straw manning is slightly different, where you try to misrepresent someone's position. This is more conflation of more of kute argument and you too argument, rather than straw man. But yeah, I didn't really much agree with that. And I didn't also like the idea that TERFs don't really believe what they think, or that they are using concerns that are legitimate as cover for more illegitimate concerns. There's something very sort of, I don't know. But there's some points in there that are worthy of consideration, worthy of thought at least. But yeah, the point of this was to listen through and try to challenge my own conceptions and try to respond to them and think through them. And I was trying to listen to them and trying to deal with them as best as I know how, which isn't to say that I did it perfectly. But to quote, that's right, thanks. Yeah, to quote. Yeah, so there's something problematic in that. But yeah. So, I don't think I understand it intellectually anymore. I guess my major takeaway from this is that I'm not understanding how people think, or apologize, how people feel. And so that I guess this did somewhat remind me that I don't understand how other people feel, because I've never had those feelings or been close to people that have those feelings. So I don't understand it on a level I can, and I've never had that sympathetic reaction in the literal sense of sympathy or sympathetic. So that was a good reminder, I suppose. And these people are feeling something that's got to be legitimate on some level. What exactly it means and what conclusions we should draw, because people's feelings don't, make them valid. People can have invalid feelings. I think people will agree to that. At least in general, people's feelings can be invalid. I mean, if you feel, they have to be. Like, if you feel one way, like in a relationship, for example, if you feel one way and someone else feels another way about it, they can't both be right? So, I don't know. I think people's feelings can be invalid. Whether or not these feelings are invalid or whatever, it's like, whatever. But thank you to the Amber chick who said I did a great job. I tried to listen to it, tried to consider it as much as I could. And I'm not sure how much better we came off in the end, but try to listen to it for its worth. So, yeah. So, and I'm also open to discussing this with trans people. There's been a few suggestions, If you have suggestions of who to talk to, give me their contact information in Discord. It's the best way to find me. Just tag me with the contact information of people. If you can find anyone who's interested in talking about this, it's like, yeah, but it might be interesting, but because I've talked about people with it before and it's never really worked out. So, do we actually know trans, non-binary people? Please meet and get to know some, listen to them. I'm trying, man. I'm trying. Should reach out to ContraPoints? Man, I've tried. No, I mean, ContraPoints by her own terms says that she's not interested in this discussion. She said so in the video. She's not interested in the discussion. She's had the discussion too many times, and always winds up in dead space. And I seriously doubt that she'd be interested in talking to me about this. So I don't think that's a productive discussion. I don't think that's a productive suggestion. So yeah. So Blair White, maybe. That might be interesting. Kayomi says, I think hearing your perspective helps me to better understand my colleagues who are also trying to understand. It's especially important in healthcare, which I'm in. Yeah, fair enough. It's like we don't completely understand what we're talking about here. And like we try to intellectualize it because we don't have other tools. And like it's like you're feeling a particular way. It's like I don't know what to do with that. So yeah. Christina says you did an excellent job. Pronouns and matters around this discussion are very touchy. No joke, right? Is there something right below your camera? Yeah, I was looking at that too with the light. I'm not sure what that is because I was looking at that too with the light. What's reflecting on me? Maybe it's the ceiling. I'll have to look into that with that below. There's some weird glow at the bottom. Yeah, I'm not sure where that's from. I'll have to figure that out. Maybe the light is too close if it's the bottom of the lens. Yeah, I might have to move the light further back from the lens, but I'll have to fix that later. So I'll work into it. Yeah. So, yeah. Do we have any trans lawyers? I'm sure they're trans lawyers. Yeah. Blair Light might be the easiest way to start the dialogue. Maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure about the glare. It's probably just where the light is positioned. Ask Nesrikita about Iron Liz. Maybe. The physicist I worked for had an inter-department panel of transgender if anyone's interested. Yeah, that'd be cool. It's like, yeah, I don't completely understand what we're talking about here. Yeah. The new lens is very rad. The new lens kicks ass. It was a great suggestion from Nate 200. It's like, yeah, it's a really, really good lens. Description below. Andy Mom Sammy says, I think you did a wonderful job. The chat particularly opened my eyes to some things. Yeah. It's like, I can only really work from the position I'm at, right? I mean, that's true for everyone. It's like I can only work from the position I'm at. So I'm like, here's where I am, and here's what I'm thinking about, and here's what I'm not understanding, and here's some things I think are valid, and here's some things that are invalid. Things I'm trying to understand. And, yeah. Look at Benjamin Boyce's channel. He's had a lot of people. I drew you 2 pictures. Look at them sometime. Totally intellectualizes the concept. Went on Discord. Where'd you draw me 2 pictures? Mosaic Task Force texted me. That's cool. Where'd you tag me with some photographs? In Uncivil? See someone's post. That's what they meant. Tag. Drop the ad in his name. Yeah. Christine Beck. Maybe. This is a canard from a plane. That's funny. That's not what we mean by canard. Think you should watch it again, then examine your views? Maybe. Probably watch some other videos too. I like the fact you're open to changing your mind. Yeah, I mean, I really, again, I've been heavily influenced by Jordan Peterson. I've watched quite a lot of his lectures. And Jordan Peterson mentioned this, mentioned it a couple times, but he mentioned it in his debate with Sam Harris. Is like, if you're a scientist, you gotta listen, because like, yes, if you, Jordan Peterson had a great quote about this. I'll try to paraphrase as best I can. Jordan Peterson says, I've come up with a bunch of arguments, and I've tried to come up with counter arguments in my own mind, and I've been able to defeat the arguments that I've been able to come up. But that doesn't mean I'm right. Doesn't mean them at all. And so when someone comes along with a counter argument, it's like, you made a mistake in this fundamental proposition. It's like, yes, I can correct that. Now I've made progress. It's like, yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it too. It's like, try to listen, try to see what they're saying. Does law currently have any distinctions between sex and gender? I mean, a little bit, kind of, but not really. They're mentioned separately, but how the courts have treated them, not really. No, not to the best of my knowledge. I'm sure there's some cases somewhere that do it, though. Feelings can drive process of enacting or repealing laws, but to be workable, law must be based on factually determinable parameters. Yeah, we have to understand what we're talking about. Yeah, exactly. Just Me Mini says, Jordan Peterson, no. I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson. Big fan of Jordan Peterson. I've seen him live 3 times. I've read his book many times. Listened to the oral audio, seen many of his YouTube videos. I'm a big fan of him. I like Jordan Peterson a lot because I always feel like he pushes my intellect up, because he's smarter than me. And I feel like I always have to push my intellect up to try to meet him. And I like that feeling of like stretching my intelligence. I like that feeling of like pushing at the bounds of what's possible, because he's making some very complex arguments. I'm like, okay, I have to really reach for what he's talking about. So I like that in particular. I'm looking forward to his new book. Ash says, my house is very clean. Yeah, very good. And there's been some dissent with the change. There's been some dissent with the change of the icons. We see the white on. Okay, Christina, what are we thinking about the white on green? And what are we thinking about the white on purple? Are we liking this? Who is white on yellow? Oh yeah, NATO. Are you liking? Okay, I might need to change that yellow color. Mosaic Task Force. Yeah, that color's not really working out. I don't know though. I think the overall idea of white on green, and so white on purple makes the color a little bit more visible. So maybe I just need to change the yellow. But and then I can obviously change the I can change the background as well to match. So that'd be good. So I can also change the white square to be green and just have it be on a instead of being on a circle, being on a thing. So yeah, I think the yellow needs to be changed. But I do like the green. I do like the purple. I do like the blue. The white background sucks. Yeah, I'll change that. So I'll change it so the whole thing is blue. We'll have the scales on the entire thing. That'll look good. White on yellow is bad. We'll need to change the yellow. Rick says, just let me fix it. No, I'll fix it. No one messes with my icons but me. Brr. White and green and white and purple pops out. Yeah, I just need to change the yellow to a different color. But yeah, so I'll change the yellow and I'll change the white so it matches. Rick is on it. No, he's not. Damn it. It's mine. Brr. Yeah, you're unpaid intern. That's fine. Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm going to head off for a while because I have to be on in an hour for another live stream for members Q&A. You guys remember that's the thing that's happening. So I have to take a break so that I'll be fresh and alert for my members only in an hour. So you'll excuse me at this point. If you're enjoying the stream, please remember to give it a like. Please remember to give it a subscribe. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to make this members only or not, because it is off-brand content, or it's not legal content. And my typical rule is if it's legal content to make it members only. So I'm not sure if I'm going to make this members only. Maybe I won't do it today. Maybe I'll change it in a couple days. But I think I'll probably make it members only at some point. But if you're liking this, remember to subscribe, give it a like, and all the rest of it. Thanks for all the super chats. Yeah, red is the furthest along. I did this color spectrum, right? So I did it from color spectrum. So I moved the color spectrum to change the colors. So yeah. Yeah, the yellow is invisible. I'll change it. I'll change it to a different color yellow. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Until later's my friends. Cheers and goodbye. Oh, and when am I trying to get Nick on Rikita? I've contacted him again, man. I contacted him again. I'm like, can we do something this week? He's like, we'll get back to me. I'll keep trying, man. I'm trying to get Nick on. So hopefully soon. All right, later, my friends.